Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Lost Echoes in the Dark Woods. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain of the mountains. I adjusted my backpack, feeling the weight of the gear pressing against my back as I hiked deeper into the forest. It was supposed to be a routine training exercise for the search and rescue team, just another day in the wilderness where I felt more alive than anywhere else. But something about the air that afternoon felt different, heavy, almost stagnant, as if the woods themselves held their breath. The call had come in about a missing hiker, a college student whose friends had reported him missing after a camping trip gone awry. By the time we assembled for the operation, twilight had already begun to cloak the forest in darkness. I could see the worry etched on the faces of my fellow rescuers, the way their eyes darted nervously among the trees, as if they expected to find something lurking just beyond the reach of their flashlights. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered at the trailhead, the last remnants of daylight fading into shades of indigo and gray. I scanned the group of veterans and novices alike, everyone eager to prove themselves. I felt a familiar rush of adrenaline, the kind that came with each call to action, mixed with an unsettling sense of foreboding. Our team leader, Mark, stood at the front, his voice authoritative yet somehow strained. He outlined the plan, the route we would take, and the areas we would cover. The missing hiker was last seen near a rocky outcrop known as Devil's Peak, a name that had always sent a shiver down my spine. Mark emphasized the importance of staying together, of not straying from the path. I watched as he looked into each of our eyes, searching for commitment, for courage. The woods quickly swallowed us, the path narrowing between towering pines. My flashlight beam danced across the underbrush, illuminating the twisted roots and damp moss that carpeted the ground. I fell into step beside Jenna, a rookie with bright eyes that betrayed her unease. "Do you think we'll find him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged, forcing a smile to reassure her. "We'll do our best. That's what we're trained for." But even as I said it, I felt a gnawing doubt. The forest had a way of consuming people, of hiding secrets beneath its surface. As we hiked further, the tranquility of nature became increasingly unsettling. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the rustle of unseen critters in the brush, everything seemed amplified in the encroaching darkness. I started to wonder if I was hearing things, strange sounds that didn't belong to the forest. Were they the echoes of my own fear, or was something else out there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? Hours passed, the silhouettes of trees morphing into twisted figures of shadow as our lights flickered in the gathering night. We reached the outcrop, a jagged rise that loomed ominously against the sky. The air was still, too still, and I felt a chill creep along my spine. Mark ordered us to spread out, to search the area methodically. As I climbed the rocky incline, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I paused, scanning the trees below, half expecting to see a pair of eyes peering back at me from the darkness. Nothing. Just the deep black of the forest, swallowing sound and light, as if it were alive, breathing. I took a deep breath and pressed on, forcing myself to concentrate on the task at hand. I called out the missing hiker's name, my voice echoing off the rocks, but the silence that followed felt like a taunt. I moved around a boulder, and there it was. Something caught my eye. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a jagged edge. I approached cautiously, my heart racing. The fabric was unmistakably part of a hiking jacket, the same colors described by his friends. My stomach twisted as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. It was then I noticed the tear was fresh, as if it had happened only moments before I arrived. A breeze whispered through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. "Mark." I called, my voice sharper now. Over here. He appeared within moments, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to concern as he examined the fabric. This could be a good sign, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Let's keep looking. As we retraced our steps, I felt the weight of the forest pressing down on me, an oppressive force that made each step feel laborious. I tried to shake the dread that clung to me like a second skin, but my instinct screamed that something was off. Night fully enveloped us, and the forest transformed, becoming an alien landscape of shadows and whispers. The beams of our flashlights flickered as if they, too, sensed something looming beyond the veil of darkness. I stumbled upon one of our team members, Ben, standing frozen, staring into the distance. Ben, what is it? I asked, my breath hitching in my throat. He pointed, but his hand trembled. I thought I saw something moving. Over there. I turned, peering into the thick underbrush, my heart pounding in my ears. Nothing but darkness stared back at me, but I felt a nagging suspicion that we were not alone. A cacophony of rustling leaves erupted nearby, and I instinctively stepped closer to Ben, my instinct screaming. Let's stay focused, Mark urged, but his voice lacked the confidence it usually bore. We were not just searching for a missing person anymore. The forest felt alive with something sinister, and with every passing moment, the anxiety gnawed at me. As we continued our search, the shadows deepened around us, suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn deeper into a trap. Whatever had taken that hiker was watching, waiting for us to make a mistake. The forest had its secrets, and I feared we were about to uncover them in ways we could never have anticipated. The cold seeped into my bones as I trudged deeper into the sprawling woods, the trees forming a thick, oppressive canopy overhead. It was a world of shadow and silence, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the very branches whispered secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I had always considered myself a rational person, yet here I was, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing the fear clawing at my mind. We had been called out for a search and rescue operation. A group of hikers had gone missing, lost among the labyrinth of trees and undergrowth that sprawled across the mountain. For days, the team and I had combed through the terrain, relying on ever-dwindling hope and the knowledge that we were their last chance. I recalled the faces of the people we had interviewed, the worried parents, the desperate friends, each one more frantic than the last. They clung to the hope that their loved ones were just delayed, that they might stumble across a familiar path any moment. I wished I could share their optimism, but the deeper we ventured into the woods, the more the unsettling feeling gnawed at my thoughts. With each step, the shadows grew longer, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder, convinced I could sense something lurking just beyond my line of sight. It was ridiculous, I knew that. Yet, something didn't feel right. An unseen presence weighed heavily in the air, thickening the silence until it felt alive. Hey, you all right? Josh, my partner, interrupted my thoughts. He walked a few paces behind me, his voice a low murmur, almost swallowed by the trees. His tone was steady, but I could see concern etched across his face. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile. Just thinking about those missing hikers. Do you think we'll find them? He hesitated, and I could tell he was grappling with his own unease. I don't know. We just have to keep looking. The sun had begun its descent, casting an orange glow that filtered through the branches, illuminating the underbrush with a spectral light. I could see the unease mirrored in the way he shifted from foot to foot, the way his eyes darted nervously as we pressed on in silence. It was not comforting. Night fell quickly, the vibrant colors fading to cold shades of blue. We set up camp in a small clearing. The radio crackled with intermittent updates from base, but it felt futile. The forest was a maze, and the missing were but ghosts within it. I tried to shake the feeling of dread that hung around me like a fog, but it clung tight. As we prepared dinner over a meager fire, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was amiss. The trees seemed to draw closer, as if they were conspiring against us, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I glanced at Josh. He stared into the flames, lost in thought. "I think they might be hurt," I said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "What if they can't find their way back? What if—" My voice trailed off, the weight of my own imagination pressing down on me. He looked up, concern etching deeper lines across his brow. "Don't think like that. We'll find them. We have to." His words were meant to reassure, but they twisted the knot of anxiety in my stomach further. I wrapped my arms around my knees, contemplating the oppressive darkness that surrounded us. The distant sounds of the forest, a rustle here, a snap of a twig there, seemed amplified, twisted by my fraying nerves. "Do you ever feel like we're not alone?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could reconsider. "What do you mean?" Josh looked at me, confusion breaking through his concern. "Like, I don't know. Like someone or something is watching us," I admitted, my gaze drifting to the penumbra that bordered our firelight. He laughed gently, but it held a nervous edge. "You're just feeling the pressure of this place. It gets to everyone. You'll see when we find them. Just wait." But the laughter didn't soothe me. It unsettled the fear that simmered beneath the surface. I wanted to argue, to voice the intuition gnawing at me, but I held my tongue. Instead, I watched the flames twist and dance, a reflection of the growing turmoil within me. That night, sleep came fitfully. I tossed and turned, dreams haunted by flickering shadows and muffled cries. I bolted awake more than once, convinced I heard soft voices drifting through the trees, a desperate plea for help that sent chills racing down my spine. Each time, I would sit up, heart racing, only to find the campsite still and silent, the darkness swallowing every sound. Then, somewhere in the depths of the night, I heard it, a sound that pierced through the nighttime stillness. A scream. Not just any scream, but one that felt raw, primal, echoing the horror of desperation. It shot straight through me, leaving no room for doubt. "Josh!" I hissed, shaking him awake. He stirred, bleary-eyed, confusion giving way to concern. "What? What is it?" I heard something. I strained my ears, listening for any trace of the haunting sound that had jolted me from sleep. But in the silence that followed, I felt the weight of my own fear. "Probably just an animal," he murmured, brushing off my worry. "It was a person. I know it." My voice trembled, but I was sure of what I had heard. Before he could respond, the scream echoed again, closer this time. I felt it resonate in my chest, a visceral call for assistance that sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Get your gear," I said, urgency pouring into my words. "We have to go." Josh hesitated. It could be a trick of the woods, a wild animal. "There are people out there," I insisted, my voice rising. "We have to help them." He finally nodded, his eyes wide with the weight of the moment. We gathered our flashlights and checked our packs. That primal scream still echoed in my mind as we stepped into the darkness, the trees looming around us like silent sentinels. With each step, the forest felt less like a home and more like a predator closing in, and I could hardly ignore the gnawing sensation that we were being led into a trap laid by something far more sinister than we could comprehend. The morning sun broke over the treetops like an unwelcome guest, spilling a pale light into the tent where I had spent a sleepless night. My body still ached from the hike in, but my mind raced with thoughts of the search. We had set out the day before, spurred by the frantic texts and pleas of a distraught family. Their son, Tommy, had gone missing in the dense woods surrounding the old quarry. We were told he had ventured out alone, seeking a thrill or perhaps just a moment of escape. What lay ahead felt both thrilling and ominous. As I unzipped the flap of the tent, the cool morning air cut through, sending a shiver down my spine. The campsite was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the distant echo of birds. I stepped out, squinting against the brightness, and found Mark sitting by the fire pit, poking at the embers with a stick. His face was drawn, eyes sunken. We both knew what loomed ahead and the toll it could take on our spirits. "Morning," he said, his voice gravelly. "Ready for another day of searching?" I nodded, forcing down the dread that clutched at my throat. We planned to comb through a section of the woods that led to the quarry first. It had been a popular hangout for local kids, a place where laughter echoed off the water's surface, far removed from the despair we faced now. But knowing Tommy had been there, perhaps alone and frightened, felt like running my fingers over a jagged edge. We gathered our gear, maps, walkie-talkies, flashlights, and supplies, loading everything into the truck. The air was thick with tension as we drove deeper into the woods, crunching over gravel roads that snaked through towering pines. My heart raced in sync with the engine, anticipation mingling with fear. Every shadow cast by the trees seemed to whisper secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong in these woods. After parking the truck, we set out on foot. Each step felt deliberate, as if we were treading unhallowed ground. My mind replayed the family's anguish, the mother's face pale and drawn, her voice breaking as she described her son. As we walked, I scanned the underbrush, looking for any sign, a backpack, a shoe, anything that might indicate Tommy had been there. Hours slipped by, a blend of searching and silence that felt heavy and suffocating. We found nothing but the scattered remnants of nature, twigs and fallen leaves, and the faint echo of a distant crow. The deeper we ventured, the more isolated I felt. The trees thickened, their trunks like sentinels guarding forgotten secrets. "Let's take a break," Mark suggested finally, wiping the sweat from his brow. We settled onto a fallen log, the air around us dense with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink, but the water felt heavy in my stomach. "I still can't believe he's just gone," I said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Mark replied, rubbing his neck. "But we can't lose hope. Families need closure." I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. We'd come this far, yet I felt no closer to finding him. I glanced at the sun, its position dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist around us. "Let's keep moving," I suggested, wanting to shake the dread that had settled into my bones. As we resumed our search, the atmosphere shifted. The forest grew quieter, as if holding its breath. I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, an instinctual warning, but I shook it off as paranoia. The day stretched on, each moment weighing heavier than the last. Then, just as dusk began to creep in, we stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood the remnants of an old campsite, the fire pit overgrown with weeds, rusted cans scattered like fallen soldiers. My stomach twisted as unease washed over me. It was too quiet. "Do you feel that?" I asked, glancing at Mark. He paused, his expression mirroring my own. "Yeah," he said, scanning the perimeter. "Something feels off." Before I could respond, a faint sound broke the silence, an echo of laughter. I turned sharply, heart pounding against my rib cage. The sound was distant but unmistakable, ringing through the trees like a cruel taunt. "Did you hear that?" Mark nodded, his eyes widening. "It came from over there." He pointed toward a thicket of bushes. With hesitant steps, we moved toward the sound, our instincts urging caution. The laughter faded, replaced by a sudden stillness that was almost palpable. "Tommy?" I called out, my voice trembling. The woods swallowed my words, leaving an eerie silence in their place. We pushed through the underbrush, the branches grasping at us like skeletal fingers. As we drew closer, the laughter returned, more sinister this time. It twisted and turned, echoing in a way that chilled my blood. Mark's face paled. We should go back. This isn't right. But something compelled me to move forward. If it was Tommy, he needed us. I had to believe that. I stepped into the clearing, heart racing, and froze. There, in the dim light filtering through the trees, stood a figure. It was a boy, his clothes torn and dirty, but it wasn't Tommy. The boy turned slowly, and a twisted smile creased his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Help me," he said, voice laced with something unnatural. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground. Behind him, the shadows shifted, and I felt a cold dread swirl in the pit of my stomach. "Mark," I whispered, but the air felt thick and suffocating. And then it hit me, the laughter was no longer playful. It had morphed into something primal, echoing through the trees like a warning. "Get back!" Mark shouted, breaking the spell. But it was too late. I stumbled backward as the darkness seemed to swell, the woods closing in. In that moment, I realized some things in these woods were not meant to be found. The air in the woods was thick, choking me with the dread that clung to every tree and curled around every rock. I had been searching for Emily for hours, but the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting elongated shadows that twisted and flickered ominously. Everything felt wrong. The chirping of crickets had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed against my ears. I retraced my steps, stepping over the same fallen log I had passed several times, its damp bark slick beneath my fingertips. I had come to this forest more times than I could count, each visit marked with laughter and exploration. It was familiar ground, but now it transformed into a labyrinth, a place that seemed to conspire against me. Each rustle in the underbrush heightened my senses, but it wasn't the sound of wildlife. It felt intentional. "Emily." I called again, my voice ragged. The last echoes of her name faded, swallowed by the thickening atmosphere. I clutched the flashlight, its beam flickering weakly, almost as if it were struggling to find its own courage. Cameras hadn't caught her departure, just that moment before she had vanished into the dense trees, smiling and carefree. Now the frantic memories looped in my mind like a film reel stuck on replay, casting doubt over every choice I had made that day. Why hadn't I insisted she stay with the group? Pushing deeper into the woods, I thought of the rescue team, their faces grim as they had prepared for the search. They had warned me not to venture too far, not to stray from the trails. "Stay close to the last known point," they said, their words heavy with urgency. But what did they know? I was the one who had seen Emily laugh and dance through the underbrush. I was the one who owed it to her to find her. As shadows stretched across the ground, I stumbled into a small clearing, where the trees parted to reveal a circle of tangled roots and damp earth. Something caught my eye in the fading light, a scrap of fabric, a vibrant piece of her jacket caught on a thorny bush. My heart raced as I knelt to retrieve it, the chill of the evening air wrapping around me like a cold hand. I brushed against a layer of dampness that coated the leaves. I hoped it was just dew. "Emily." I shouted again, my voice now a desperate plea. Returning to my feet, I scanned the area. The light from my flashlight cut through the darkening air, but the beam felt feeble, shaking against the encroaching night. I took a step back, disoriented. Had I heard something? I turned toward the sound, a faint crack of twigs, just beyond the edge of the clearing. "Emily?" I called, my heart in my throat. Nothing but silence answered me. I forced myself to breathe, to stay grounded. My hands trembled as thoughts of unimaginable possibilities swirled in my mind. What if she encountered someone? What if she was hurt? My instinct screamed for me to retreat, to return to the safety of the trails and regroup with the rescue team. But as the shadows deepened, I felt an inexplicable pull to push deeper into the woods. It felt as though something waited for me just out of sight, something that wanted me to keep going. I trudged forward, each step heavier than the last. The trees loomed like gnarled giants, their branches stretching out like fingers, clawing at the dimming sky. I had turned off the beam of the flashlight, trying to conserve power, but it left me feeling blind, vulnerable, as if the forest itself were watching me. The darkness thickened, swallowing sounds. The world around me seemed to fade until the only thing left was the stumbling rhythm of my own heartbeat. I walked, guided by instinct and the remnants of a nagging sense that I needed to get further away from the clearing. Then a voice broke the silence. Help! It was faint, a whisper carried by the wind, but it froze me in my tracks. I strained to listen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Help! Me! The voice was familiar, tinged with fear, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could react, I found myself moving toward the sound, pulled by an invisible thread. I stumbled over roots and rocks, desperate not to lose the call. My mind screamed for caution, but my feet betrayed me. Every instinct yelled to turn back, yet I pressed forward, drawn into the depths of the forest. Emily! I shouted again, pushing through the underbrush, the darkness closing in around me. Help! The voice was closer now, emerging from the shadows like a ghost, yet it felt wrong, distorted, as if several voices merged into one. I stepped carefully, feeling the damp earth beneath my boots, my breath shallow and rapid. Then I saw something, a figure draped against a tree, limbs askew, hair cascading down with a sheen of darkness. Emily? I stumbled closer, the name barely escaping my lips. As I reached her, my heart sank. It was not Emily. The woman before me had pale skin and wide eyes, glassy and unblinking. A thin, bloodied scrap of clothing clung to her, and her mouth twisted into a soundless scream. I recoiled, the truth slamming into me with the force of a freight train. I backed away, breathless, as the shadows shifted around me, revealing more figures emerging from the darkness. They were all twisted, broken, each one a reflection of my widening terror. The forest felt alive, breathing around me, closing in. I stumbled back, knowing what I had to do, but the weight of their hollow gazes bore down. The air grew heavier, the darkness thicker. And just like that, the whisper of Emily's name faded into the night, leaving only darkness behind. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay as I trudged deeper into the forest, the beam of my flashlight flickering erratically against the oppressive darkness. My heart raced, not just from the physical exertion but from the unsettling quiet that surrounded me. I had joined the search and rescue team after the disappearance of the two hikers, drawn by a mix of professional duty and personal turmoil. Every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye stirred an unshakable anxiety deep within my gut. It had been 3 days since Sarah and Lucas went missing, and the search efforts had escalated as time slipped away from us. We had combed through countless trails, traversed steep inclines, and examined every nook and cranny of the wilderness that could have swallowed them whole. Yet, hope seemed a distant whisper, drowning beneath the weight of despair. As I moved cautiously through the underbrush, a low growl resonated from the shadows, freezing me in my tracks. My heart pounded painfully against my rib cage, and I strained to listen through the oppressive silence. The forest felt alive, as if it was waiting for something to happen, something sinister. I squinted, trying to penetrate the veil of darkness, but the beam of my flashlight betrayed me, casting only faint glimmers against the twisted trees. I shook my head to clear the nagging thoughts that gnawed at me. This was just paranoia, I told myself, the product of fatigue and fear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now alone. It felt as if something was watching me, lurking just out of sight. I pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency that compelled me to push through the dread. Each step felt heavier, as if the earth beneath me sought to drag me down into its depths. I stopped suddenly at the sound of rustling nearby, my breath hitching. I trained my light towards the sound, revealing nothing but the swaying branches of an old oak. As I continued, a memory flashed in my mind of the briefings we had received before we embarked on this search. The park ranger had warned us about the strange occurrences reported in this area: missing pets, odd noises at night, and sightings of shadowy figures that vanished upon closer inspection. I had brushed them off as tales meant to deter the curious, but now, standing alone in the dark, those stories clung to my thoughts like a shroud. The ground became increasingly uneven, rocks jutting up and roots sneaking across my path. I stumbled, catching myself just in time, cursing under my breath. I had to focus. Sarah and Lucas needed me. They were out there, their faces etched in my memory, and I couldn't let fear deter me from finding them. Then I saw it, something glinting amidst the thick underbrush. My heart raced as I approached, brushing aside the foliage to reveal a broken compass, its needle spinning erratically, lost in the chaos of the magnetic pull of the dense forest. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back as I picked it up, a bitter reminder of their plight. They had lost their way, and time had become a cruel adversary. In that moment of distraction, a distant sound broke the silence, a faint, anguished cry. It echoed through the trees, sending a chill down my spine. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I had signed up for this, choosing the path of rescue over safety. I had to investigate. I had to know if it was them. I moved towards the sound, each step calculated but uncertain. The cries grew louder, more frantic, twisting into a plea for help that stabbed at my heart. I felt the urgency clawing at me, pushing me deeper into the thicket, the trees closing around me like a maze. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. A deafening silence enveloped me, the absence of sound palpable, almost suffocating. I stood still, my breath echoing in my ears, the flashlight beam trembling. I called out, my voice shaky, "Sarah, Lucas." But the forest swallowed my words, and dread pulled in my stomach. I turned back, retracing my steps, but the path I had followed moments ago seemed to have vanished. Panic rose as I stumbled through the undergrowth, branches clawing at my clothes. The shadows lengthened and twisted, creating grotesque silhouettes that danced along the periphery of my vision. And then, I saw an outline, barely visible through the tangled brush. I rushed towards it, heart pounding with hope and fear. As I drew closer, the figure solidified into a shape, and I gasped. It was Sarah, or what was left of her. Her eyes, wide and glazed over, stared into nothingness, pleading without words. A thin, dark line traced from her lips down her chin, the remnants of her last scream. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, grasping at the fading thread of reality. The forest warped around me, shadows deepening and closing in. I turned to run, but the ground beneath me buckled and shifted, roots and rocks ensnaring my feet. I fell, the flashlight skittering away, plunging me into darkness. In that pitch black, the whispers began, low and insistent, promising me the same fate. My heart raced as I clawed at the earth, trying to rise, but the forest had come alive, holding me captive. The echoes of their cries filled my head, mingling with the laughter I thought I imagined. As I gasped for breath, the weight of the forest pressed in, and I realized in that moment I was no longer the rescuer. I was the haunted. Story 2, Echoes of the Forgotten Home. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a weary glow over the landscape as I drove down the long, winding road that led to my childhood home. I hadn't visited in years, a decade at least. After my parents had passed away, the house became a relic of memories too painful to confront. Yet, when I received the letter from the estate lawyer, I felt an inexplicable pull to return. I knew I would have to face the empty rooms, the silence that had swallowed my laughter, but I hoped to find some semblance of closure. As I approached, the owls came into view, cloaked in a tangle of overgrown weeds and wild vines that clawed at the weathered wooden siding. The porch sagged in the middle, and the windows, once bright with life, now stared blankly like hollow eyes. I parked the car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel underfoot strangely loud in the stillness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, memories mingling with the musty aroma of neglect. I hesitated at the bottom of the steps, a shiver skirting down my spine. The last time I had stood here, I was a carefree child, running through the halls, chasing shadows that danced in the corners of my imagination. Now, I felt like a ghost returning to haunt my own past. The door creaked open with little persuasion, as if waiting for me to step inside. The interior was cloaked in darkness, the air stale and heavy. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams of light filtering through the grimy windows. I flicked the switch by the door, but no light flickered to life. The power had long been cut. With a deep breath, I pulled out my phone, its flashlight illuminating the hallway ahead. The first room to my right was the living room, where my parents had spent countless evenings. The tattered sofa remained, though the upholstery had faded to a dull gray. I ran my fingers along the armrest, feeling the rough texture of fabric against skin, and a wave of memories rushed through me, the laughter, the warmth, the love. But the air felt different now, thick with ghosts of the past. I swallowed hard, pushing the memories back down as I turned to explore further. I stepped into the kitchen, the linoleum floor cracked and peeling. The scent of mold was overpowering, and I wrinkled my nose as I examined the remains of a once thriving space. My mother's recipes still adorned the fridge, yellowed and curling at the edges. I reached out to touch the fridge door, its surface cold beneath my fingertips, and felt an unsettling chill creeping up my arm. A sudden sound echoed from the hallway, a soft scuffling, like the shuffle of footsteps. My heart raced, and I turned quickly, shining the flashlight into the dim corridor. Shadows danced around me, but nothing moved. It was just the house settling, I told myself, a reminder of its age. Still, I felt the prickle of unease settle over me, a layer of dread I hadn't anticipated. I continued my exploration, each creaking floorboard a reminder of my intrusion into this forsaken space. The dining room was next, where the family had shared countless meals. The table loomed at the center, its surface marred by age and neglect. I wiped away a layer of dust, revealing the faint outline of a forgotten tablecloth pattern. For a moment, the memories flooded in again, laughter and the clinking of glasses, but they were swiftly eclipsed by the oppressive silence that now filled the room. As I walked back toward the hallway, a cold gust of wind rushed through the open window, sending a shiver down my spine. I paused, glancing over my shoulder. The shadows seemed deeper, more profound. I pushed away the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't afford to indulge in such thoughts. The stairs to the upper floor loomed ahead, and although the sense of dread pulled in my stomach, I forced myself to climb. The wood creaked beneath my weight, and I half expected it to give way at any moment. The upstairs hallway was cloaked in darkness, and the air felt heavier here, as if the walls were closing in. I pushed open the first bedroom door, my childhood room. It looked just as I had left it, a time capsule frozen in decay. The bed was stripped bare, the mattress long gone, and my toys lay scattered on the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust. I stepped inside, the creaking of the floorboards amplified in the silence. Was it my imagination, or did I hear a faint whisper? My skin prickled, and I quickly brushed it off as an echo of my own fears. I turned to leave when something caught my eye, a small, ornate box tucked beneath the bed. My heart raced as I knelt down, my fingers trembling as I pulled it out. It was a music box, its surface adorned with intricate carvings. I hesitated, a part of me warning against disturbing the past, but curiosity won. I opened the lid, and a haunting melody began to play, filling the room with a soft yet eerie tune. As the melody played, the shadows in the corners seemed to shift, writhing as if in response to the sound. I blinked, feeling a chill settle deep in my bones. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. And then, as the last note faded into silence, I heard it, a soft, unmistakable voice, whispering my name from the darkness. Sarah. The following day, I returned to the house. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that crept across the ground. Every step toward the weathered door felt like a confession, an admission of my curiosity. I could still hear the wind whispering through the cracked windows, beckoning me to unravel the secrets held within the rotting walls. As I approached, I noticed the overgrown garden, a wild tangle of weeds and thorns that seemed to clutch at my ankles as I walked by. I paused for a moment, my heart racing at the thought of what lay inside. The house loomed like a specter, its once bright colors faded into lurid shades of gray and brown. I pressed forward, drawn by an inexplicable force. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the emptiness like a mournful cry. Dust motes danced in the dim light that filtered through the grime-coated windows, swirling in the stale air. I took a deep breath, the scent of decay infiltrating my senses. The silence was palpable, a weight that settled on my shoulders. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight, each creak a warning that resonated in the stillness. I remembered the tales of the place, whispered stories of those who had come before me, who had entered and never returned, their fates swallowed by the house itself. But fear was not enough to deter me. My curiosity burned brighter. I moved cautiously through the entryway, my fingers trailing along the peeling wallpaper, tracing the faded floral patterns that clung to the walls like remnants of a forgotten dream. The air grew colder, and I shivered involuntarily, a chill that gnawed at my spine. I could almost hear the house breathing, its walls alive with a history I could not fathom. The living room was furnished with remnants of a past life, a tattered armchair, a cracked mirror, and a scattering of dust-covered books. I wandered over to the fireplace, an empty cavern that had once held warmth. I knelt down, peering into its depths, and found nothing but ash and cobwebs. The room felt heavy, as if it bore the weight of sorrow and despair. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the house, a soft thud, followed by a shuffling sound. My heart stopped. I held my breath, the silence stretching out like an eternity. The noise had come from upstairs. I strained to listen, my body frozen in place. Was it my imagination, or was something moving in the shadows? I hesitated, a primal instinct urging me to retreat. But my feet remained anchored, curiosity warring against fear. The sound came again, a soft shuffle, like the dragging of a foot across the floorboards. I couldn't deny it. I was captivated, drawn toward the source of the disturbance. Climbing the creaking staircase, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Each step felt like a descent into madness, and the shadows thickened around me, a comforting cloak for my growing dread. At the top of the stairs, the hallway was dimly lit, the light barely penetrating the darkness. The faded photographs that lined the walls seemed to watch my every move, their eyes hollow and accusing. I approached the first door on the left. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, but I hesitated, a sliver of doubt wedging itself in my mind. What if there was someone or something waiting for me inside? What if I was not alone? I yanked the door open, half expecting to find an empty room. Instead, I was met with a chaotic swirl of dust and the overwhelming stench of mildew. The room was a nursery, the remnants of childhood scattered across the floor, broken toys, a faded mobile still hanging from the ceiling, and a crib that stood ominously in the corner, its paint chipped and peeling. For a moment, I was paralyzed by the haunting imagery, the echoes of laughter long silenced. I stepped further inside, compelled by the eerie atmosphere that surrounded me. And then, I saw a thin thread of movement beyond the crib, just out of sight. I could feel my pulse quickening, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn and flee. But I pressed on, drawn by an unshakable need to confront whatever lurked in the shadows. I peered around the crib, dread coiling in the pit of my stomach. What I saw nearly made me scream. A child sat crouched in the far corner, her curls falling over her face, obscuring her features. She wore a simple white dress, its fabric stained and tattered. I caught a glimpse of her eyes, wide and vacant, a darkness pooling within them. Before I could utter a sound, she stared directly at me, her gaze freezing me in place. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, like the rustle of leaves in a dying wind. It was a plea that cut through the air, raw and desperate. My heart hammered in my chest, a primal fear clawing at my throat. I stepped back, my breath hitching in my lungs, as reality blurred around the edges. The child's words echoed in my head, twisting like a knife. I knew I should run, should turn away and leave this horror behind. But the fear binding me was overshadowed by something else, an insatiable curiosity, a compulsion to understand. But before I could react, the child vanished into the shadows, leaving only the sound of silence to fill the room. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I turned, stumbling backward, the nursery suddenly feeling more like a tomb than a refuge. As I fled down the hallway, the floorboards groaned in protest, the house alive with a malevolent energy. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I stood there for a moment, fighting the urge to scream, my heart racing as I grasped the enormity of what I had just witnessed. The ____ loomed behind me, an insatiable beast, hungry for secrets, hungry for me. The next day, I stood just outside the gate, the rusted iron bars creaking under my hesitant touch. The sun hung high in the sky, but its light felt muted, shrouded by the weight of the clouds gathering ominously in the distance. I had spent the past few hours grappling with my decision. The house loomed before me, an eerie silhouette against the darkening horizon, taunting me with its secrets. Curiosity beckoned, but so did a sense of dread. With each step toward the front porch, I felt the air grow heavier, thickening with an unspoken horror that clung to the walls like a shroud. The house, with its peeling paint and broken windows, seemed to breathe a warning, but I couldn't turn back now. The stories of my youth, whispered among friends, called to me the ghost of a child who roamed the halls, the shadows that darted through the rooms at night. They had always felt like mere fables, but now, standing before the warped door, they felt unsettlingly real. I grabbed the doorknob, the cool metal sent a shiver down my spine. It resisted, but with a hard twist, I pushed it open. The door screeched in protest, revealing a dimly lit foyer covered in layers of dust. It was a time capsule, a snapshot of lives once lived, now forgotten. The air smelled stale, laced with mildew that clung to the peeling wallpaper like memories refusing to fade. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath my weight. Shadows danced in the corners where light failed to penetrate. Dust motes hung suspended in the air, swirling lazily like enchanted fireflies. Each item I passed, a broken chair, a cobweb-draped chandelier, felt imbued with a sense of loss, as if the very house mourned its past. I walked deeper inside, the atmosphere thickening with every step. I could hear the wind howling outside, a low growl that seemed to echo through the halls. The chill crept under my skin, and I wrapped my arms around myself, pushing forward despite the growing anxiety in my chest. The living room was the first place to capture my attention. A faded floral sofa sagged in the corner, and an old coffee table lay strewn with yellowed newspapers, their headlines blurred by time. I scanned the pages: murders, disappearances, tragic accidents. Each story carried a weight of sorrow, but what caught my eye was a photograph tucked between the pages. It showed a family, smiling in front of this very house, their joy a stark contrast to the decay surrounding me now. A chill crawled up my spine as I turned the photo over. Scribbled handwriting read, "They never came back." My heart raced. Who were they? Why hadn't they returned? I shoved the photograph into my pocket, suddenly feeling the need to leave, the air around me growing oppressive. I moved on to what I assumed was the kitchen, pushing open the swinging door. The floor was littered with shattered glass and fallen utensils. A rusted stove stood in the corner, its surface caked with grime. I felt the cold seep into my bones and turned to leave, but something stopped me, an unsettling sound, faint and almost indistinguishable. It was a child's laughter, echoing from somewhere deep within the house. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The laughter was muffled, almost playful, yet it sent an icy tendril of fear wrapping around my heart. I had to know if I was truly going insane. I backtracked to the living room, straining my ears, but the laughter had vanished, replaced by the low groan of the house settling. The laughter had been real. I forced myself to breathe, dismissing it as my mind playing tricks. I turned again, heading toward the staircase that spiraled into darkness. Each step creaked ominously beneath my weight, and I paused at the top, my heart racing. The second floor was dim, the air thick with dust. I ventured into the first room, the door frame splintered and half collapsed. Inside, the sunlight barely filtered through a grimy window, illuminating a child's bedroom with two small beds, both unmade. The walls were adorned with faded drawings and tattered posters of cartoon characters. A forgotten world, frozen in time. I stepped further inside, and the floorboards groaned as if in warning. Something caught my eye, a small doll lying in the corner, its dress torn, and one eye missing. I approached, a strange sense of familiarity washing over me. I had owned a doll like this when I was a child, a gift from my mother. I reached down. The moment I touched the cold porcelain, a wave of memories crashed over me. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I whirled around, heart racing. Panic clawed at my throat, and I pounded on the door, but it refused to budge. The air turned colder, wrapping around me like icy fingers. The laughter returned, louder now, echoing off the walls, playful, but with an edge of mockery. I pressed against the door, my mind racing. I could hear footsteps, soft and shuffling, approaching from the other side. I grabbed the handle and twisted with all my strength, but it was locked tight. The laughter intensified, swirling around me, and I could feel the walls vibrating with some unseen energy. With a sudden rush of adrenaline, I turned back to the room, looking for another way out. The window was barred, but as I approached it, my body froze. In the reflection of the glass, I saw a shadow flicker behind me. A small figure, standing in the doorway, watching. It was a child. The chill that seeped through the air that evening was more than just a drop in temperature. It felt as if the house itself exhaled a breath of icy dread that wrapped around me, constricting my chest and slowing my heartbeat to a sluggish crawl. I stood at the threshold of the abandoned house, the peeling paint and sagging roof giving off an aura of decay that sent shivers down my spine. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the world draped in darkness, and yet here I was, compelled by an insatiable curiosity that clouded my better judgment. Just yesterday, I had stumbled upon a weathered photograph of this very place in an old box tucked away in the attic of my grandmother's house. The picture showed a family standing proudly in front of the very same structure, their faces bright with joy. I was drawn to it, enchanted by the stories whispered in the margins of their smiles. But now, as I stared at the house, I felt only a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to swallow the world around me. Despite the warnings my grandmother had often shared, tales of a darkness that crept through the veins of this house, I found myself stepping inside, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Moonlight streamed in through the broken windows, illuminating clouds of dust that danced lazily in the air. The faint smell of rot lingered, a reminder of the life that once filled this place, now choked by years of neglect. The hallway stretched before me like a gaping maw, leading to shadows that twisted and turned in ways I couldn't explain. It felt as if the owls were watching, waiting, holding its breath as I explored its depths. I reached for the wall, my fingers brushing against the rough texture of the exposed wood. Instantly, I felt a sharp chill, as though I had disrupted something that lay dormant. I made my way into the living room, the remnants of old furniture scattered like forgotten memories. An ornate mirror hung crookedly on the wall, its surface clouded and cracked. I stepped closer, peering into the distorted reflection, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure behind me. I whirled around, heart racing, but found nothing. Just the echo of my own breath, heavy in the stillness. Pushing through the unease, I examined the scattered belongings, a faded floral print couch, a dusty lamp, and a coffee table littered with yellowed newspapers. The headlines blurred into one another, detailing mundane events from decades past, but one article caught my eye. It spoke of a family tragedy, a fire that had consumed a nearby home, claiming the lives of a mother and her children. In that instant, I felt a chill that went deeper than the cold of the house. It gnawed at my insides, a vile whisper that told me the past had not truly died. Compelled by a force I didn't understand, I turned to leave the room when I heard a low, creaking sound from above. I froze, straining my ears to catch the slightest hint of what might lurk in the darkness above. A part of me screamed to run, to escape the sinister grip of this place, but I couldn't leave, not yet. Slowly, I ascended the staircase, each step groaning beneath my weight. The air grew heavier, thick with a tension that wrapped around me like a shroud. As I reached the top, I found myself in a narrow hallway, doors lining either side. I was drawn to the last door on the right, its once vibrant paint now faded and peeling, revealing a dull gray beneath. Gathering every ounce of courage, I turned the knob. The door swung open with a reluctant groan. Inside, the room was nearly empty save for a tattered rocking chair perched in the corner and a small, dust-covered trunk at its base. A strange energy pulsed through the air, thick and electric, as I stepped inside, feeling an invisible force pulling me closer to the trunk. I knelt beside it, my heart racing, and opened the lid. Inside lay a collection of childhood toys, dolls with glassy eyes, a toy soldier forever frozen in time, and a small book with a faded cover. I picked up the book, brushing away cobwebs, my fingers trembling as I opened it. The pages were filled with childish scrawl, stories of adventure and laughter, but the final pages morphed into chaotic scribbles, a stark contrast to the earlier innocence. At the bottom of the trunk, something glinted in a thin stream of moonlight. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. I pulled it out, a locket, tarnished and old. Its surface was etched with intricate designs, but as I turned it over, I found a name, Clara. The name echoed in a dark corner of my mind, resonating with something I couldn't grasp. A soft whisper tickled my ear, a breathy sound that made the hair on my neck stand on end. "Help me." It was faint, yet it resonated through the silence like a distant bell. I registered its urgency, an imploring cry wrapped in despair. My pulse quickened, and panic clawed at the edges of my sanity. "Who are you?" I found myself asking the empty room, my voice trembling. Silence enveloped me in response, thick and suffocating. I turned to leave but found the doorway now shrouded in shadow. The house seemed to shift around me, the walls closing in with a predatory hunger. The echo of that whisper lingered, a relentless reminder of the darkness that dwelt within these walls. As I took a step back, my foot caught on something solid, and I fell hard, the locket slipping from my fingers. When I landed, the room spun around me, and a darkness rushed in, swallowing the light. I caught a glimpse of the locket just before the shadows engulfed it, my last connection to whatever lingered in this forsaken house. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, the whisper morphing into a cacophony of cries that clawed at my mind. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape the malevolent presence surrounding me. But just as I reached for the doorknob, a sharp pain shot through my arm, and I turned to see a shadow looming over me, dark and formless, as if the very essence of the owls had come alive to claim me. In that moment, as fear gripped me like a vice, I realized I had awakened something that should have remained buried. The past was not done with me yet, and as I fought against the pull of the darkness, I understood that I might never leave this house alive. The shadows lengthened as the sun sank behind the horizon, surrendering the world to a deepening darkness. I stood at the edge of the overgrown path that led to the abandoned house, my breath forming pale clouds in the chill of the evening air. The stories had dripped from lips like poison, tales of a family that had vanished without a trace, leaving their home to rot under layers of dust and despair. Each rumor had added a layer of dread, but curiosity gnawed at me, urging me forward. I took a hesitant step onto the path, the crunch of twigs beneath my feet echoing in the stillness. The trees loomed above, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and I felt the weight of their watchful presence. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach as I approached the house. Its silhouette, dark and formidable against the twilight sky, loomed like a creature waiting to pounce. As I stepped onto the creaking porch, the wood groaned beneath my weight, a sound that seemed to awaken the house from its slumber. I paused, heart racing, and pressed my palm against the splintered door. It swung open with a reluctant creak, revealing a yawning abyss of darkness beyond. I hesitated, a flicker of doubt igniting in my mind. I had come here alone, driven by the thrill of discovery. But as I crossed the threshold, I felt a chill that was far more than just the evening air. Inside, the air felt heavy, laden with dust and the scent of mildew. The wavering light from my flashlight illuminated peeling wallpaper that hung like tattered flesh, and the floorboards whispered secrets of their own as I moved deeper. Every footfall sent ripples of sound through the silence. The owls seemed to stir in response. I pressed on, my pulse quickening with each step. The first room I entered appeared to have been a parlor, its furniture draped in ghostly white sheets that billowed slightly as I moved. An old piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and cracked. I approached it, fingers hovering over the keys, a part of me yearning to press down and summon music that had long been silenced. But another part of me knew better. It felt as if the house itself would shudder in protest if I dared disturb its slumber. With a shiver, I turned away, exploring the remnants of lives once lived. Photographs hung crookedly on the walls, their subjects mere specters in faded frames, faces blurred by time. I wondered what they had seen, what had happened to them. My breath quickened as I moved into the next room, a dining area that still held the ghostly outlines of a table set for a feast. Dust lay thick on the surface, a stark reminder that no one had dined here in years. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a faint thud from upstairs. My heart leaped into my throat, and I froze, straining to listen. It was followed by a soft whisper, almost unintelligible, like the wind murmuring secrets. I swallowed hard. It could have been the owls settling, or the wind sneaking through cracked windows, yet dread pulled in my stomach. The stairs loomed before me, a narrow staircase shrouded in darkness. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. What if someone had taken shelter here? The thought gnawed at me, a sliver of fear that suggested I was not alone. Yet, my curiosity overpowered my instincts. I gripped the railing, its wood rough against my palm, and climbed the stairs, every creak echoing like a warning. At the top, the hallway stretched before me, doors lined like sentinels guarding secrets. The whispers grew louder, seeming to beckon me forward. I hesitated outside the first door, a sense of foreboding tightening around my chest. I could push it open, confront whatever lay inside, but the fear of what I might find made me recoil. I chose the next door instead, the wood splintered and worn. It swung open with an eerie ease, revealing a room that had been untouched by time. A child's bedroom. The bed lay unmade, toys scattered across the floor, and walls painted in bright colors that seemed to murmur of innocence lost. A small rocking horse stood in the corner, its paint chipped and faded, its eyes dark and void. I took a cautious step inside, my heart racing with the weight of the atmosphere. A chill swept through the room, as if an unseen presence was watching me. It was absurd, I knew, but I felt a pull toward the bed, as if some force beckoned me to sit. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, and I jumped back, the momentary shock giving way to the realization that I was utterly alone. That's when I heard it again, a soft, distinct whisper. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the sound. It came from the far corner of the room, where a dresser stood against the wall. I approached it warily, each step weighed down by the heavy air. As I reached the dresser, the whispers died down, leaving behind an oppressive silence. A mirror hung above the dresser, its glass clouded with age. I peered into it, half expecting to see a ghostly reflection. But it was just me, haggard and wide-eyed. As I turned to leave, I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of the mirror. I spun around, heart racing, but the room was empty. I backed out of the room slowly, the weight of the house settling on my shoulders. I needed to leave, to escape whatever presence lingered in these walls. But as I turned to bolt down the stairs, I heard it again. A child's laughter, echoing, playful and haunting, swirling around me like mist. I froze, rooted in place, dread clawing at my throat as the laughter faded, leaving only the silence of the house. The darkness thickened around me, and I sprinted back toward the stairs, propelled by instinct. I could feel the house shifting as I fled, as if it sought to contain me within its rotting embrace. I reached the landing, my heart racing, and hurled myself down the stairs. The shadows writhed around me, but I couldn't look back. When I burst through the front door, the cool night air rushed over me like a bomb. I stumbled down the porch steps, not daring to glance back at the house that loomed in the darkness. I could still hear echoes of laughter mingling with the whispering wind, a reminder of the secrets buried within those walls. As I fled down the path, I vowed never to return, leaving behind the shadows of a home that had long since forgotten the warmth of its inhabitants. Story 3, Lost at Sea, The Haunting of the Horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly around us, a vast, dark expanse that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, as if the waves whispered secrets I could not decipher. I stood on the balcony of the Sapphire Horizon, the cruise ship that had promised leisure and escape, and yet I felt a creeping sense of dread wash over me. The salt air filled my lungs, but instead of invigorating me, it felt heavy and suffocating. It was our second night at sea, and the ship had a propensity to sway as it navigated through the gentle swells. Laughter echoed from below, mingled with the clinking of glasses and the distant sound of music. Most passengers were oblivious to the unease that had settled in my chest like a stone, but I could not shake the feeling that something lurked in the shadows of this floating city. I had come aboard with my brother, Mark, seeking to escape the burdens of our everyday lives. He was eager to indulge in the cruise's many offerings, fine dining, shows, and the endless supply of tropical cocktails. I, on the other hand, was more reserved, my heart clinging to the worry that had plagued me since we boarded. There was something unsettling about the ship's design, the way the corridors twisted and turned, leading us away from the familiar and into the unknown. I returned to our cabin, the door shutting behind me with a soft click. The room was small, adorned with nautical themes that felt more kitsch than charming. Mark was sprawled on the bed, flipping through the ship's itinerary, completely unbothered by the bad vibes I could not shake. His carefree attitude exacerbated my growing anxiety. "Come on, Amanda. We're missing the magic show," he called, a grin plastered across his face. "You might even see something really scary." I forced a smile, but inside, my heart raced. "I think I'll pass. I'm not feeling well." His brow furrowed with concern. "You didn't drink too much last night, did you? You barely touched your drinks." "No, it's not that," I replied, my voice thin, almost lost in the ship's ambient noise. "I just need some air." Mark didn't push further, and before I knew it, he was bounding out of the cabin, leaving me alone with my restless thoughts. I leaned against the wall, willing the sensation of dread to subside. It was ridiculous, I told myself. I was being irrational. I tried to focus on the ocean, its undulating surface visible from our window, but the shadows it cast only deepened my unease. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to succumb to the night's allure and venture onto the deck. The stars above shimmered like shards of glass against the inky black sky, and the sound of the waves crashing against the hull filled my ears. I walked along the edge of the deck, watching as passengers mingled, their laughter ringing hollow against the serene backdrop of the sea. Yet, there was an indistinct murmur beneath the laughter, a low hum that sent a chill down my spine. I glanced towards the far end of the deck, where the lights flickered slightly, revealing a small group of people gathered. They huddled together, their faces obscured beneath the shadows. Curiosity piqued, I moved closer, the crowd slowly parting as I approached. The air felt thicker here, suffused with a tension I couldn't quite understand. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge, seemingly staring down into the black abyss. Its posture was rigid, and an unnatural stillness enveloped it, setting it apart from the rest of the animated crowd. "Look!" someone shouted, breaking the spell that had gripped me. The figure turned, and I caught a glimpse of its face. It was an older woman, her features gaunt and sunken. Her eyes held a vacant stare, an abyss that mirrored the ocean below. I felt an involuntary shiver race down my spine. A gasp escaped my lips as she began to sway, the rhythmic motion luring me in like a moth to a flame. Just as quickly as it had begun, a collective murmur spread through the crowd, and the woman turned away, disappearing into the shadows. The atmosphere shifted, people exchanged uneasy glances, and the jovial spirit drained away like water through a sieve. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I imagined it? But the lingering unease wouldn't let me dismiss what I had seen. I backed away, nearly colliding with someone behind me. "Are you okay?" a voice asked, filled with concern. It was a crew member, his uniform crisp against the darkness. I nodded mutely, my mind racing. "Did you see that woman?" I asked, desperation threading my words. "What woman?" he replied, furrowing his brow. "There's no one here." I felt my breath hitch. She was just... "Please, ma'am," he interrupted gently. "It's a big ship. Maybe you just saw someone from a distance. Why don't you come with me to the lounge? It's much brighter there." A spark of anger flared inside me. Did he think I was imagining things? But I followed him, the shadows trailing behind me, their whispers becoming a cacophony that filled my ears. The lounge was bustling, and as we entered, the noise swallowed my thoughts. Yet, amidst the chaos, I couldn't shake the image of the old woman from my mind. I had seen her, I was certain of it, and I felt a strange connection to her, a realization that something was not right aboard the Sapphire Horizon. I glanced around the lounge, searching for a sign, anything that might anchor my fears in reality. But as the lights dazzled and the music thrummed, I wondered if my escape would lead me to freedom or into the depths of something far more sinister. The ocean's embrace was deep, and I feared what it might hold beneath its surface. The cruise ship, the majestic Dawn, glided through the calm waters of the Caribbean like a shimmering leviathan, but I felt anything but at ease. A sense of foreboding clung to me like a wet blanket, thick and suffocating. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, and I could hear the distant laughter of families mingling with the clinking of glasses. They were oblivious to the creeping dread that gnawed at me. I had always been anxious on boats, but this felt different. It was more than just the gentle sway of the ship or the distant horizon that swallowed the sun. It was a sensation that whispered to me, a voice that echoed in the corners of my mind. Something was wrong. I had spent the earlier part of the day exploring the labyrinth of the vessel, my curiosity tugging me from one deck to another. The more I walked, the more I noticed unsettling details. The lights flickered occasionally, not in a natural rhythm, but rather as if they were struggling to stay lit. I brushed it off as a minor technical issue, an electrical quirk typical of a ship this size. But even as I tried to convince myself, I felt an icy tendril of fear coil around my heart. The dining hall had been an extravagant display of elegance, filled with laughter and chatter, yet among the mirth, I had spotted her. A woman, seated alone at the far end of the room, with long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She wore a flowing white dress that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow in the candlelight. Her eyes, however, were what held my attention, dark pools that seemed to draw me in, sparking a cold recognition deep within my chest. I felt as though I had known her in another life, but I could not place when or where. As the sun slipped below the horizon, I found myself wandering the deck, drawn to the solitude of the night. The ocean sprawled before me, an endless expanse of darkness that whispered secrets of ages past. The stars twinkled overhead, but their beauty offered no comfort. Instead, I felt exposed, vulnerable against the backdrop of the vast, unknowable sea. I leaned against the railing, staring into the inky depths below. The night air was thick with salt and an unsettling chill that crept into my bones. Perhaps it was just my imagination, but I could have sworn I heard a faint melody drifting from somewhere beneath the waves, an eerie lullaby that pulled at my heartstrings. The song felt familiar, as if it had been sung to me long ago, yet it was twisted, dissonant. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught my eye. I turned to see the woman in white standing at the edge of the deck, her bare feet barely inches from the railing. My heart raced as I watched her sway gently, as if entranced by the melody that seemed to envelop us both. I called out to her, my voice trembling. "Are you all right?" She turned her gaze towards me, and for a moment, the world around us faded. Her lips curled into a haunting smile, but there was no warmth in her eyes. They were empty, void of life or spark, as if she had been hollowed out. I took a step closer, compelled by an unseen force, but fear rooted me to the spot. "Come," she beckoned, her voice a mere whisper, yet it carried a weight I couldn't comprehend. "Join me." A chill danced down my spine. I glanced over the railing at the swirling abyss below, where the water surged restlessly. "What are you doing?" I asked, the words escaping my lips before I had time to reconsider. "Waiting for them," she replied, her smile widening, flickering like the failing lights inside the ship. "They come for those who listen." My pulse quickened. "Who comes?" "The lost," she answered simply, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. "The ones who wandered too far from the light." I didn't want to believe her, but something deep within me resonated with her words. I thought of the flickering lights, the odd sounds echoing through the hallways, and the shadows that danced at the corners of my vision. Whispers filled the air, muffled and beckoning, urging me to step closer to the edge. "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my tone as I took a cautious step backward. "You need to come away from there. It's dangerous." Her laugh was a low, melodic sound that twisted my insides. "Danger is relative, isn't it?" She leaned forward, her hair cascading like a dark waterfall, almost brushing against the surface of the water. "You should join me, you know. You'll understand." I felt as if I were teetering on the edge of a precipice, my mind racing. The sea below beckoned, the waves whispering coaxing promises that snared my thoughts. I struggled against the compulsion to step closer, to surrender to the siren call of the depths. "I can't," I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. Her expression darkened, frustration etching lines across her otherwise serene face. "You will regret not listening," she warned, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "When the lights go out." In that moment, A loud crash echoed through the ship, the sound reverberating like thunder. The lights flickered violently, plunging the deck into darkness. Panic surged within me as I stumbled back, clutching the railing as the ship groaned under an unseen weight. It felt as if the very hull of the majestic Dawn shuddered in fear. I turned back to her, but she had vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone, engulfed by the night. The ocean roared beneath me, the melody now a cacophony of wails that echoed from the depths. I knew I had to escape, but the darkness was closing in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I ran, my footsteps pounding against the cold metal deck, fear propelling me forward as I sought the safety of the brightly lit interior. I had to find others, to warn them, to make them understand. But as I raced through the corridors, the whispers grew louder, mingling with the sounds of celebration echoing in the distance. No one else seemed to notice the encroaching darkness, the shadows that danced along the edges of the ship. I burst into the dining hall, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The clinking of glasses and the laughter of the passengers continued as if nothing had happened, as if the woman in white had been nothing but a figment of my imagination. But I knew better. The danger was real, and the sea was waiting. I woke up before dawn, the pale light filtering through the curtains of my cabin, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The gentle sway of the ship had become a constant lullaby, but it did little to soothe my nerves. An unsettling sensation prickled at the back of my mind, as if something was lurking just beyond the confines of my room, subtle yet insistent. I had spent the previous day exploring the cruise ship, each deck revealing more opulence than the last. The grandeur of the dining halls and the extravagant theaters seemed almost surreal, but with each new face in the crowd, a sense of dread accompanied me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all trapped in a gilded cage, devoid of escape. I stepped out into the narrow hallway, the thud of my footsteps muffled by the plush carpeting. The air felt thicker than usual, as if the ship itself held its breath, waiting. I wandered toward the ship's bow, a part of the vessel that I hadn't fully explored. The dimly lit corridor led to a set of stairs that spiraled upward. I hesitated, a knot forming in my stomach, but curiosity gnawed me until I took a deep breath and ascended. At the top, I found myself on a nearly deserted observation deck. The ocean spread endlessly before me, a vast expanse of dark water that blended into the horizon. The sky was a deep blue, peppered with cotton-like clouds, but the beauty was overshadowed by an ominous atmosphere. The waves crashed against the hull with an unsettling insistence, and I felt as if the sea was alive, resentful, waiting for something. I leaned on the railing and gazed out, trying to push the nagging unease away. As I looked closer, I noticed something. A dark spot beneath the surface, shifting. It was too large to be a fish, and for a moment, I thought I glimpsed a shape. My breath hitched, and I leaned further over the railing, my heart racing. But the moment evaporated, and the water returned to its calm facade, as though mocking my imagination. Something rustled behind me, breaking the spell. I turned sharply, and there stood a crew member, a tall man with a somber expression, his uniform crisp but the dark circles under his eyes betraying fatigue. He cleared his throat, and I could see the tension in his posture. "Ma'am, this area is off limits," he said, his voice low and steady, quiet enough to compel my curiosity. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "There's nothing to see here." "It's not safe," he replied cryptically, then motioned for me to return to the interior of the ship. I sensed that he was hiding something. My pulse quickened, but I nodded, stepping back reluctantly. As I walked away, the crew member's gaze lingered, and I felt the weight of a warning in his eyes. What was lurking out there, just beneath the surface? The thought gnawed at me as I retraced my steps back through the corridors, my heart heavy with foreboding. I passed the dining hall on my way to my cabin and spotted a group of passengers gathered, their laughter echoing against the grandiose walls. I hesitated, drawn to the warmth of their camaraderie, but I felt like an outsider. The smiles were broad, but their eyes suggested a shared secret and understanding I was not part of. As I entered my cabin, I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to banish the unease that clung to me. My phone buzzed on the small table, breaking the silence. It was a message from Anna, an old friend who had insisted on this cruise as a chance for us to reconnect and escape our mundane lives. "Hope you're having fun. Let's meet at the lounge later." I stared at the screen, my heart fluttering with both excitement and anxiety. Should I confide in her about the strange feelings consuming me? No, that would only sound paranoid. I texted back a simple agreement, forcing myself to shake off the anxiety. The lounge was alive with music when I finally descended the stairs. I scanned the room, searching for Anna's familiar face. A band played softly in the corner, their melodies floating through the air like whispers of secrets. Couples danced, and laughter filled the space, but I still felt that sense of isolation creeping back in. "Hey!" Anna's voice called from across the room, and I felt a jolt of relief when I saw her wave. She was seated at a table lined with soft cushions, a bright smile illuminating her face. I made my way through the crowd, the chatter and clinking glasses momentarily distracting me from the creeping shadows in my mind. "Glad you made it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a warm hug. "You look a bit pale. Everything okay?" "Just a little tired, I guess," I replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Over drinks, we chatted about mundane topics, my nerves slowly easing as I found comfort in her familiar presence. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The way the crew member had looked at me, the dark shape beneath the water, it all simmered beneath our conversation like an undercurrent of dread. "Have you noticed anything strange about the ship?" I ventured, finally giving voice to the fear that had built up inside me. "Like, it feels off." Anna frowned slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "What do you mean?" "Just, there's something in the water below," I said hesitantly. "And the crew seems a bit on edge." She laughed lightly, but it felt half-hearted. "It's a cruise, not a horror movie. You're just letting the excitement get to you." But as I looked around the lounge, it felt as if hidden eyes were watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I forced myself to laugh along, but my heart was no longer in it. Deep down, I knew that something was waiting in the dark waters, and its call was growing stronger. I just hoped I wouldn't be the next to answer. The corridor stretched before me, a long, dimly lit tunnel that seemed to warp and pulse with the ship's movements. The rhythmic creaking of metal and the low hum of the engine surrounded me, each sound amplified in the oppressive stillness of midnight. I wrapped my arms around my waist, fighting off an uncomfortable chill that settled in my bones. Thoughts of my cabin, where I could lose myself in the comforts of familiarity, urged me to return, but the pull of the unknown kept my feet moving. Earlier that evening, I had overheard a commotion near the aft deck. A group of passengers had gathered, their murmurs swelling like an ominous tide echoing through the ship. One voice, trembling and sharp, spoke of a missing girl. I hadn't caught her name, but the fear in that woman's tone sent shivers down my spine. The girl was last seen near the crew quarters, and the ship had begun its routine search, but with the vastness of the ocean stretching beyond the vessel's walls, I couldn't fathom how they would find her. Curiosity gnawed at me, driving me deeper into the ship's veins. I turned a corner, finding myself in a less traveled area where the lights flickered like fireflies trapped in a jar. I hesitated at a door marked with faded lettering, "Crew Only." I couldn't help but wonder if that was where she had gone, lured away by the thrill of adventure or perhaps something darker. The handle gave way with a soft creak, and I stepped cautiously inside. The room was cramped, dim, filled with shelves crammed with supplies. The air smelled stale, tinged with something antiseptic, My heart raced, each beat sounding like a drum echoing in the confined space. I stepped further in and felt a sense of intrusion wash over me, as though I were trespassing into an untold secret. On the far side of the room, a series of metallic doors lined the wall. I approached one, running my fingers over the cold, smooth surface. A faint sound floated through the cracks, a hiss, like air escaping from a tire. My heart lurched. I glanced back, the nagging sensation of being watched creeping over me. I was alone, but the feeling of ice lingering on my back made me shudder. Suddenly, a loud thump reverberated through the room, sending me spinning toward the exit. Just as I reached for the door, another thump came, louder this time. It was followed by a low, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing, and in my panic, I knocked over a stack of boxes. They clattered to the ground with a resounding crash, scattering the ship's supplies across the floor. The noise settled, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound beyond the thumping of my own heart. The sensation of being watched intensified, a cold sweat breaking out on my brow. I forced myself to take a step back toward the door, but a strange compulsion held me in place. I had to know what was behind that door. I swallowed hard and turned back. Gathering what little courage I had left, I pressed my ear against the cold metal, my heart thundering in my chest. The hissing continued, growing louder. It was accompanied by an intermittent scratching that sent a shiver racing down my spine. The girl? Was she trapped behind that door? I had to find out. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling as I turned it. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing a narrow space darkened deeper than the hallway outside. A faint flicker of light illuminated a back corner, casting eerie shadows on the wall. As I stepped inside, the door swung shut behind me with a decisive thud, the sound echoing ominously. Panic clawed at my throat. The flickering light came from a small lamp perched atop an old crate, revealing more of the room, a makeshift storage area filled with rusting equipment and crates stacked haphazardly. I could feel the air grow thick, heavy with despair and neglect. I stepped further inside, heart racing, my breath shallow. In the far corner, I spotted a figure huddled against the wall. I froze. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Was it the missing girl? Just as I began to approach, the figure stirred, and my heart sank as I recognized the familiar outline of a crew member. He was pale, sweat-beaded, and his eyes were wide with fear. "Help, please," his voice trembled, barely above a whisper. I could see him shaking as he scooted back, pressing himself into the corner as if trying to escape something unseen. What happened? I managed, my voice trembling. "Where's the girl?" He looked at me with a wild intensity, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. "It's not safe here. You don't understand. They're coming for us." "Who?" I pressed, a sense of dread now coiling in the pit of my stomach. "The crew. Something's wrong with them. They've changed." He shuddered, his eyes darting to a shadow that seemed to flicker at the edge of the room. "We need to get out. Now!" Before I could respond, the flickering light sputtered and died, plunging us into darkness. The sounds, the hissing and scratching, grew louder, a chaotic symphony of terror surrounding us. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. I grabbed the crew member's arm, pulling him toward the door, but his weight suddenly went slack. "What's wrong?" I gasped, turning to him, but his eyes were glazed, fixated on something behind me. I felt the air shift, a heavy presence looming just beyond the edge of the darkness. The smell hit me then, a foul, rancid odor that sent bile rising in my throat. Before I could move, a cold wind blew through the room, and I felt a hand, no, claws grip my shoulder, sending ice through my veins. I turned, ready to scream, but the darkness enveloped me, swallowing my voice whole as the scratching sound intensified. The last thing I registered was the crew members' terrified eyes widening in recognition before everything went black. The sun dipped below the horizon, surrendering the world to darkness. The cruise ship, once a floating palace brimming with laughter and music, now felt like a hollow shell adrift on an indifferent ocean. Each creak of the ship echoed through the quiet corridors, a reminder that I was alone in a way that grew increasingly unsettling. I had spent the last few days trying to piece together the puzzle of the missing passengers, a task that had become an obsession. By now, I knew every inch of the ship, from the grand atrium where empty chairs sat like silent sentinels to the labyrinth of service corridors that snaked behind the walls. I had ventured into the crew quarters, seen the vacant cabins, and even dared to peek into the engine room, where the incessant rumble of machinery drowned out all thoughts. Yet, there was no sign of anyone. I had stumbled upon a few personal items, an abandoned purse, a children's toy, a photograph of a family laughing on the deck, but they were just remnants of lives once lived here. The absence of human presence was a tangible weight that pressed down on me, each hour deepening the feeling of isolation. That night, as I wandered the ship, my heart raced. The flickering overhead lights cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls, and I could swear I heard whispers in the wind. I had tried to convince myself it was merely my imagination, but the chill that crept into my bones told me otherwise. I paused at the edge of the pool deck, where the water glistened like a black mirror. It was then I noticed something unusual, a dark shape submerged beneath the surface. I leaned closer, the salty breeze brushing against my skin, and squinted into the depths. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the shape. A face, distorted and pale, stared back at me from the water. I stumbled back, heart racing, and it vanished with a ripple, leaving only the reflection of the ship above. Rational thought fought to regain control. It had to be my mind playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched lingered. I turned to leave the deck, not wanting to linger where darkness pulled like a predator waiting for its prey. That was when I heard it, a soft thud, like a footstep echoing in the distance. My stomach dropped. I wasn't alone. I crept toward the noise, moving cautiously along the edge of the deck, my pulse pounding in my ears. The ship felt alive, the metal groaning like a beast awakening from slumber. Shadows twisted and warped in the dimness, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to emerge from the dark. The sound led me to a service door I hadn't noticed before, slightly ajar. I hesitated, fear gripping me. I could turn back, pretend I hadn't heard anything, but curiosity tugged at me with insistent fingers. I pushed the door open, its hinges squealing in protest. Inside, the passage was narrow and dimly lit. The walls were lined with familiar machinery and equipment, and the cloying scent of oil and saline filled the air. I stepped forward, the sound of my breath the only thing breaking the silence. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, soft yet distinct, like the rustling of dry leaves. "Help me." The voice sent a jolt of terror through me. I could feel the hairs on my neck stand on end as I strained to hear more. There it was again, but this time so faint I wondered if I had imagined it. I took a step deeper into the service corridor. "Please," the voice implored again, more frantic this time. I forced my legs to move, but with each step I took, dread coiled tighter around my throat. I reached a door at the end of the hallway, its surface marred with rust and peeling paint. The whisper came once more, echoing through the keyhole. "Help me." I hesitated, a battle raging within me. The door could be a trap, but I couldn't ignore the plea. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. It turned with a reluctant groan, pushing the door open a crack. The room beyond was cloaked in shadows, but I could make out a figure huddled against the far wall. My heart raced as I stepped inside, feeling a sudden wave of heat wash over me, mixing with the damp, stale air. "Who are you?" I called out, barely managing to keep my voice steady. The figure looked up, a gaunt face framed by wild, tangled hair. Eyes wide with fear stared back at me, the remnants of sanity flickering like a dying flame. "You shouldn't be here," they rasped, voice trembling. "They will come for you." "Who? What happened?" I pressed, stepping closer. My instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but I couldn't abandon someone in distress. "I can't," the figure muttered, shaking their head. "They've taken everyone. You need to leave before they find you." But before I could inquire further, the ship shuddered violently, throwing me off balance. The lights flickered once more, plunging the room into darkness. The figure shrieked, and instinctively I reached for them, but they recoiled into the shadows, their breaths quickening. "Go! Now!" The urgency in their voice ignited a primal fear within me. I raced back toward the door, my heart pounding as the ship quaked again, reverberating through the metal hull like the sound of a beast roaring in anger. I burst into the corridor, but something blocked the exit. A figure emerged from the shadows, obscured by the dim light, and I froze in place. The air thickened with an unshakable sense of dread. "Where do you think you're going?" it hissed, voice low and mocking. I backed away, desperation clawing at me as I saw an escape. The corridor felt like a labyrinth now, closing in, but I had no choice. I turned, sprinting down the passage as the laughter of whatever haunted this ship echoed behind me, mingling with the groaning of the vessel itself. As I fled into the maze of darkness, I realized with chilling certainty that I was being hunted. The ship was alive, and it had no intentions of letting me go. Story 4: Depths of the Forgotten Abyss. The air was thick with the scent of brine and decay as I stood on the rocky outcrop, surveying the churning waters below. It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows across the jagged coastline. I had always found solace in the ocean, whether it was kayaking on tranquil bays or diving into dark, cold depths. That day, however, the sea felt different, an insistent pull in its rhythm, almost like the heartbeat of some ancient creature lurking beneath the surface. My friend Emma had suggested this trip, her enthusiasm contagious. She had spoken of the hidden coves and underwater caves that dotted the coastline, places few had ventured. The thrill of exploration mingled with the salty air as I slipped into my wetsuit, its cold embrace tightening against my skin. I had always been the cautious one, while Emma thrived on pushing boundaries, daring the universe to respond. Paddling out into the open water, I felt the kayak slice through the waves, the sound of the water lapping against the hull of brief comfort. The sun sparkled on the surface, deceptive in its beauty, and I found myself momentarily lost in the peaceful rhythm of my strokes. Emma's bright yellow kayak was ahead of me, a vibrant dot against the blue, and I took a moment to admire her confident glide. "Come on, slowpoke," she called, her laughter ringing out like a melody. I picked up my pace, the thrill of adventure overriding my instinct to slow down. We had planned to explore an area known for its underwater caves, a site rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those who had lost their lives in the depths. Emma had teased me about my cautious nature. She called me a fraidy cat, but I had agreed to the trip, desperate to prove her wrong. As we reached the entrance of the first cove, the water darkened, shadows dancing beneath the surface. The sunlight flickered, momentarily swallowed by the encroaching rocks that jutted from the cliff face. Emma's excitement was palpable as she pointed towards an opening, barely noticeable at the waterline. "Let's check it out." My heart raced, but I forced myself to keep pace with her. I had come this far, I couldn't back down now. As we paddled into the cave, the ambient light shifted, the water around us transforming into oil, thick and viscous. The walls were damp, the air stale and filled with an earthy scent. Emma went ahead, her voice echoing in the confined space, filled with wonder. "This is amazing." Yet, despite my efforts to share in her excitement, unease churned in my stomach. I took a breath, trying to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like barnacles on a shipwreck. "Let's dive," Emma shouted, breaking the spell of silence. She slipped beneath the surface, her bright yellow kayak bobbing at the entrance like an unmoored ship. I hesitated, staring into the dark water that awaited me. I could see the ripples where Emma had gone down, then nothing. She had always been a strong swimmer, but the vastness of the ocean loomed like an unseen predator. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my fear, then plunged into the inky depths, the cold wrapping around me like a shroud. The water enveloped me, silence descending as I pushed beyond the sunlight's reach. I could barely see, the murky depths swallowing my vision. Panic fluttered in my chest as I kicked harder, searching for the familiar flash of Emma's wetsuit. Nothing. The underwater world was a chilling void, and I felt the presence of something else, an unexplainable sensation of being watched, as if the darkness held secrets it didn't want to share. I turned, my heart pounding as I ascended, breaking the surface with a gasp. I looked around frantically, my eyes darting between the opening of the cave and the open water beyond. "Emma!" I shouted, the echo of my voice swallowed by the cave walls. A shiver crept down my spine, and I fought against the rising tide of fear. "Emma!" Just then, a faint figure appeared at the cave's entrance, and relief flooded through me. It was her. But as I swam towards her, a sense of dread twisted my gut. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed intently on something beneath the water's surface, an expression of shock and curiosity mingling with an unearthly stillness. "Emma!" I called again, my voice trembling. I paddled closer, thoughts racing. "What is it? Are you okay?" Finally, she turned towards me, her face pale, and I felt a coldness seep into the marrow of my bones. "There's something down there," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath, a mix of awe and terror. Before I could ask what she meant, she dove back under. I hesitated, torn between following her and the instinct to turn back. The cave felt like a mouth, wide open and beckoning, but deep down, I sensed a danger lurking beneath its surface. In that moment of indecision, I heard a sound, soft, haunting. It was an unsettling melody, echoing from the depths, luring me closer, tugging at the edges of my consciousness. It was then that I realized the ocean was not only a vast expanse, but also a trap. As I teetered on the edge of the abyss, the water roiled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. The morning sun broke through the layers of mist that hung over the lake like a shroud. I stood on the edge of the dock, my toes gripping the weathered wood beneath me, staring at the placid surface that belied the turmoil of what lay beneath. The previous day's expedition had stirred something within me, a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation, as if the water were beckoning me into its depths with promises of both wonder and dread. I had decided to take my kayak out again, despite my unease. The locals had told me tales of hidden caves and submerged wonders, and I felt compelled to explore. My heart raced with anticipation as I slipped into the cockpit of the slender craft, the gentle waves lapping at the sides as I pushed away from the dock. The rhythmic splash of the paddle felt both calming and empowering. With each stroke, I distanced myself from the world above, sinking deeper into the embrace of the lake. I kept to the shoreline at first, the trees looming like giants on either side, their reflections shimmering darkly in the water. There was a tangible silence, the kind that envelopes you when nature holds its breath. It was beautiful, but unsettling. I recalled the tales of submerged logs and shifting currents, familiar warnings echoing in my mind. Yet curiosity propelled me forward, and soon I ventured farther out. As I paddled, my surroundings began to change. The trees receded, and the water opened up around me, revealing a vast expanse that felt both liberating and isolating. It was as if I had entered a different realm, a place untouched and raw, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and unyielding mystery. I caught a glimpse of something beneath the surface, a dark shadow that darted away as quickly as I had noticed it. My heart raced, but I brushed it off as a fish, dismissing my growing unease. I turned my kayak toward what appeared to be a cluster of rocks jutting out of the water. I had seen them from a distance, their jagged edges beckoning like the teeth of some ancient beast. As I approached, I noticed the water deepening, transforming from the soft kiss of a shallow bay into an unsettling blue abyss. The sunlight dimmed as clouds gathered overhead, casting the world into a muted palette of green and gray. Upon reaching the rocks, I took a moment to breathe in the crisp air, feeling the tension of my earlier excitement begin to unravel. It was then that I heard it, a lull, echoing from beneath me, as if the lake itself were murmuring secrets to the stones. I was no longer alone in my thoughts. The water had a voice, and it was speaking to me in hushed tones. Driven by an impulse I could neither explain nor resist, I secured my paddle and donned my snorkeling gear. I plunged into the water, the coolness enveloping me like a shroud. At first, everything was a haze of blues and greens, but as my eyes adjusted, clarity came. The underwater world revealed itself in surreal detail. Fish flickered past, and the smooth rocks of the lake bed stretched out beneath me, covered in a blanket of moss. But then the thrumming returned, a heartbeat echoing around me. It was disconcerting, a reminder that the lake held more than just life. It also contained ancient memories, perhaps even remnants of tragedies yet to be uncovered. I drifted deeper, the sunlight trickling down like liquid gold. An innate fear began to creep up my spine, urging me to return to the surface, but the siren song of the depths held me captive. Curiosity pulled me to a shadowy crevice, a narrow opening between two large rocks. The darkness beyond seemed inviting, promising mysteries yet to be unveiled. I hesitated, glancing back at the light above, but the pull was undeniable. I ventured inside, my heart pounding in rhythm with the thrumming, which seemed to swell in intensity. The walls of the crevice pressed in around me, and I felt an unfamiliar sensation of being watched. It was as if unseen eyes monitored my every move, instilling a sense of dread that gnawed at my resolve. My breath quickened, bubbles escaping from my mouth and rising toward the surface. I considered turning back, but the thought of retreat held a different kind of terror. I had to know what lay ahead. As I forged onward, suddenly, the water grew colder, and the thrum transformed into a roar, echoing through the corridor as if the lake were unleashing a primal fury. Panic surged through me as I realized my air was dwindling, and the passage was narrowing. I kicked harder, the darkness closing in, but it felt as though the water itself conspired to keep me where I was, a claustrophobic grip tightening around me. Just as I thought I might escape, my foot snagged on something solid, and I tumbled forward, scrabbling for purchase. My hands found a rough surface, and I pulled myself along the bottom, heart racing, lungs screaming for air. I broke the surface with a gasp, the light above a beacon of salvation. I scrambled out of the crevice, but the lake would not let me go without a final warning. A massive shadow glided past, dark and massive, obscured by the murky depths. My heart stopped, fear coiling tightly in my chest. I had to get back to my kayak, back to safety. I kicked toward the surface, the world above now distorted by my panic and the grip of the water. With one last burst of strength, I breached the surface, gasping for air, and swam toward my kayak, the outline growing clearer as I neared. The moment I reached it, I clung to the side, desperate to pull myself up. I glanced back toward the water, fearing what I might see, but there was nothing, just the ripples where I had surfaced. Yet, I knew something lurked in the depths, and the echo of its thrumming still reverberated in my mind. My grip tightened on the kayak as I hoisted myself in, trembling from the cold and fear. As I paddled back toward the shore, the clouds began to part, revealing slivers of sunlight. But even as daylight spilled across the lake, I could still feel the weight of the water beneath me, an abyss of secrets waiting to be unearthed. And in that moment, I knew I would never look at the lake the same way again. The following morning dawned gray and foreboding. I awoke to the sound of rain tapping against the cabin's roof, a steady rhythm that echoed the unease settling in my chest. After the unsettling events of the previous day, I had half a mind to pack my things and leave. But there was a part of me, a stubborn flicker of curiosity, that urged me to stay. I couldn't shake the thought of the dive site. What lay beneath the surface had become an obsession. As I sipped my coffee, I surveyed my surroundings through the misty window. Fog clung to the water, transforming the bay into a ghostly expanse. The dull light made it hard to see far, giving the landscape an eerie quality. The locals had mentioned the cove was serene, but today it felt like a graveyard, shrouded in secrecy. Something stirred within those waters, something I couldn't quite put into words. I donned my wetsuit and grabbed my gear, deciding that if I were going to uncover the truth, I needed to confront it head-on. The kayak felt heavier than usual as I dragged it to the shoreline, its familiar contours now a reminder of the shadows lurking just beneath the surface. I pushed off into the water, the cold lapping against the hull as I glided further from the shore. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the clouds hung low, smothering any warmth the sun could have offered. As I paddled into the cove, anxiety settled in my stomach like a stone. I had no clear plan. I was searching for clues, perhaps even a way to piece together the unsettling history surrounding this place. All I could think of was what I had seen through the haze of the dive mask, the silhouette that had beckoned me deeper. The cove's stillness was unnerving. The distant echo of my paddle sounded like a heartbeat in the quiet, a reminder that I was utterly alone. My breath grew shallow as I approached the marked dive site, a placard barely visible through the mist, its words worn and faded. I had read about the dangers of this area, the strong currents, the caves that twisted like veins beneath the water. But I had come too far to turn back now. I secured the kayak and slipped into the water, the cold biting at my skin. As I submerged, the world above fell away, replaced by a murky blue twilight. The water enveloped me, a claustrophobic embrace that seemed to hum with life. I recalled the stories of divers who had gone missing, tales I had dismissed as mere urban legends. Now, with each stroke, I felt the weight of those stories pressing in on me, urging me to heed their warnings. I descended slowly, the bubbles from my exhale swirling upwards, dancing with the sunlight that managed to penetrate the depths. The visibility was poor, but I pressed on, driven by an anxiety that had settled deep within my bones. The seabed loomed ahead, an expanse of rocks and shadows. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, slick surface, and I felt something shift beneath my touch. Instinct kicked in, and I pulled back, heart racing. The sensation had been too quick, too deliberate. I forced myself to breathe, to remain calm, but panic surged as I felt it again, a pressure, a presence just beyond the reach of my vision. I turned, scanning the dimly lit water, but nothing met my gaze. The shadows danced, flickering in the eerie light like whispers of secrets long buried. I took a deep breath and continued, driven by an insatiable need to uncover the truth. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet sloped steeply downwards, and I found myself at the edge of a deep crevice. Something shimmered at the bottom, a flash of silver that caught my eye. Against my better judgment, I navigated closer to the edge, peering into the darkness. As I leaned over to get a better look, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. The urge to flee clawed at my insides, but the glint of metal drew me closer, as if it were a magnet. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. I extended my hand, fingers reaching into the darkness. Just as I was about to pull back, my fingertips brushed against something cold and hard. The moment I grasped it, a surge of energy rippled through me. The object was heavy, encrusted with barnacles and muck, but the sigils carved into its surface were unmistakable. A relic, an artifact that felt ancient and wrong. I yanked it free, my instinct screaming at me to abandon it, but I was too far gone in my curiosity. In that moment, A low rumble echoed from the depths of the crevice, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the water and into my bones. I froze, dread pooling at the base of my spine. The water around me began to swirl, currents pulling me into the abyss, and I fought against them, adrenaline surging as I kicked hard, desperate to return to the surface. But the deeper I swam, the more disoriented I became. The current twisted and tugged, dragging me down. I gasped for air, panic igniting my every sense. I was losing my grip on reality, my mind racing with images of those lost divers. The surface, once a beacon of safety, felt out of reach, and the shadows below seemed to stretch, reaching for me with skeletal fingers. I clawed at the water, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. Just when I thought I would succumb, a light broke through the darkness. The surface shimmered above me, tantalizingly close. I fought with everything I had, propelled by instinct and an urgent need to escape. With a final burst of energy, I broke free into the open air, gasping as I emerged, half coughing, half sobbing. I saw the kayak drifting nearby, and I reached for it, pulling myself aboard with trembling arms. The safe world above the water felt foreign, the weight of the artifact still heavy in my hands. As I paddled back to shore, fatigue washed over me, but the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I had found something, yes, but at what cost? The cove felt alive, its depths whispering secrets I was not meant to hear. Whatever I had uncovered had awakened something, and I could feel it watching me, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue across the water as I prepared for my dive. The kayak gently bobbed in the swell, tethered to the rocky shore where I had parked my gear. My heart raced as I looked at the dark waters below, the cool depths hiding whatever secrets lay beneath. After everything that had happened since I had come to this remote area, I should have known better than to tempt fate. The plan had seemed simple enough. I wanted to explore the underwater cove that was said to be home to unusual rock formations, remnants of a time long past. A diving guide I had met at a local bar had spoken of ghostly silhouettes and unusual sights beneath the surface, but he hadn't mentioned the eerie tales that clung to the cove like the seaweed that wove its way through the waters. My thoughts drifted back to the warning I had dismissed too easily. "You never know what you'll find out there," the guide had said, his voice low and gravelly. I had laughed it off, brushing it aside as the ramblings of a man too comfortable at the bottle. Now, standing on the brink of adventure, I felt that tightening knot in my stomach, a premonition I couldn't shake. I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs, and stepped into the kayak. The water glistened like shards of glass, reflecting the fading light. As I paddled away from shore, the sound of my strokes echoed against the cliffs, a hollow reminder of my solitude. I felt more alone than ever, the vastness of the cove swallowing the world behind me. Once I reached my destination, I anchored the kayak and slipped into my wetsuit, the fabric clinging to my skin like a second layer of flesh. With my gear secured, I peered down into the depths. Dark shapes swirled below, tantalizing and foreboding. I took another breath, steeling myself against the unease that gnawed at the corners of my mind. I plunged into the water, the coolness embracing me. As I descended, the world above faded away, and I was enveloped in a hushed stillness, broken only by the distant sound of my heartbeat. The sun's rays filtered through the water, casting ghostly patterns on the rocky floor. I stared into the depths, the silhouettes of underwater formations taking shape before me. The beauty was mesmerizing, a stark contrast to the unease that lingered in my chest. As I swam deeper, strange shadows flitted across the periphery of my vision. I turned, but nothing was there. Just the rocks and seaweed, swaying gently in the current. Anxiety twisted in my gut, and I pushed the fear aside, convincing myself it was just the play of light and imagination. I searched for the formations I had been told of, the strange rock structures that were said to resemble half-formed creatures. I thought of the guide's stories, of lost souls lingering in those depths. My mind raced, weaving the tales of the cove into an elaborate tapestry of horror. I bit my lip, reminding myself that these were just stories, mere fabrications to scare tourists. Then, against the backdrop of the ocean floor, I saw it. A massive rock formation jutted out, its surface eerily smooth and almost organic in shape. The outline resembled a gargantuan sea creature, its body twisted and coiled as if in a dance with the water. I hesitated, awe mingled with dread. I swam closer, curiosity pulling me forward despite the warning bells ringing in my head. As I approached, I noticed something strange. Carved etchings adorned the rock, symbols and figures that seemed almost human. My heart raced as realization set in. These were not mere rocks, they were grave markers, remnants of something long forgotten. A chill crept up my spine, and I remembered the guide's final warning: some things are better left undisturbed. But it was too late to turn back now. My fingers grazed the surface of the stone, and I felt a sudden rush of cold, as if the water itself had turned to ice. Panic surged through me. I twisted around, scanning the darkness. The shadows seemed to close in, swirling with a life of their own. I kicked back, desperate for the surface, but the current tugged at me, pulling me deeper into the abyss. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling sound that sent tremors of fear through my body. It felt like a voice, though I could not discern the words. I was not alone. I struggled against the water, my lungs burning, but the further I swam, the stronger the pull became. I glanced back at the formation, half expecting to see something emerge from the gloom. Then, out of the swirling darkness, a figure appeared. A man, or something that once was a man, his eyes hollow, his face twisted in anguish. I gasped, bubbles escaping my mouth as I flailed against the grip of the water. He reached out, fingers curling toward me, beckoning, and I could see the depths of despair etched across his features. In that moment, I understood I was not merely witnessing a grave. I was being drawn into a story I did not belong to. With a burst of adrenaline, I kicked harder, finally breaking through the surface. The cove opened up before me, the sky a vibrant canvas of hues fading into twilight. I gasped for air, heart pounding in my chest. But even as I fought to stay afloat, I could feel the darkness beneath calling to me, promising secrets that would ensnare my mind. I scrambled for my kayak, clawing at the side and pulling myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. As I paddled back toward shore, the waters began to calm, the haunting echoes of the figure still reverberating in my mind. The cove had revealed its secrets, but it wasn't finished with me yet. I felt it lurking just below the surface, waiting for me to return, waiting to finish its story. The morning sun spilled over the horizon, tinting the water with hues of orange and gold, but it did little to warm the chill that had settled deep within me. My heart still raced from the events of the previous day, Jenna's frantic screams echoing in my mind, the sight of her thrashing in the water, and the moment my fingers grazed her arm before she disappeared beneath the surface. I had spent the night in restless waves of sleep, wondering if the dark waters of Lake Hollow had claimed another soul. I felt drawn back to that spot, as if some invisible tether connected me to the depths, pulling me toward the very place I feared. The kayak sat tethered to the dock, its yellow hull gleaming under the sun, deceptively inviting. As I slid into the kayak, the familiar creak of the plastic was overshadowed by the memory of Jenna's panic. I pushed off, the paddle cutting through the smooth water, sending ripples that quickly vanished. The surface mirrored the sky, an illusion of calm that belied the terror lurking beneath. I rowed steadily, the rhythmic swish of the paddle soothing yet unsettling. Each stroke took me farther away from the shore, toward the center of the lake where Jenna had vanished. I could almost taste the dread in the air, a metallic tang that filled my mouth with every breath. My mind raced with questions. What had happened to Jenna? Had she resurfaced? Had anyone found her? I couldn't shake the image of her flailing in the water, her face twisted in terror. I thought of her family, the grief they would face, the burden of knowing their daughter had been taken by this lake. As I reached the center, the water grew darker, an inky blue that seemed to swallow the sunlight. I stopped paddling, allowing the kayak to drift. The stillness around me felt oppressive, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. I scanned the surface, searching for any sign of movement, anything to indicate 𝐬𝐿 might be there. I gripped the paddle tightly, feeling the tension in my forearms, the way the weight of fear pressed against my chest. Then, just on the edge of my vision, I noticed something. A flash of white. Was it a piece of 𝐬𝐿's clothing? I leaned over the side of the kayak, straining to see better. The water rippled slightly, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure beneath the surface. My heart jumped into my throat. Was it her? My instinct screamed at me to look away, to paddle back to safety, but curiosity held me captive. I leaned further, trying to discern anything in the murky depths. Suddenly, a rush of bubbles erupted from below, and I recoiled instinctively. I cursed under my breath, telling myself it was just fish. Just fish. Then I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting just out of reach. Panic surged through me. The stories I'd heard about the lake whispered in the back of my mind, the drownings, the disappearances. They all seemed so distant before, mere snippets of folklore. But now, they clung to me like a shroud. What if something was down there? What if 𝐬𝐿 hadn't been alone? I paddled back hastily, almost capsizing in the process. The lake seemed to swallow my panic, the water gleaming eerily as I approached the shore. I couldn't shake the image of that shadow. It felt alive, sentient, as if whatever was lurking beneath the surface had intention. Once I reached the dock, I scrambled out of the kayak, my legs trembling as I took my first steps on solid ground. I leaned against the weathered wood, trying to catch my breath, but a nagging voice in my head urged me to return, to confront whatever darkness awaited me. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I had to tell someone. The local sheriff would want to know about my encounter, wouldn't they? I hurried up the path, each footfall heavy with dread. It felt as if the path stretched endlessly, the trees closing in around me as though they shared in my fear. Once I reached the sheriff's office, I burst through the door, breathless. Sheriff Collins looked up from his desk, his brow furrowing at the sight of my panic. "Wes, what's wrong?" he asked, concern etching lines into his worn face. I went out on the lake. I saw something," I stammered, my words tumbling over each other. It was like a shadow, maybe 𝐬𝐿. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but skepticism quickly took its place. "Wes, you need to stay calm. We're doing everything we can to find her. You can't let your imagination run wild." But I pressed on, desperation fueling my words. "No, you don't understand. I saw something moving, something down there. I think she might still be." He cut me off, his voice firm yet gentle. "We've had search teams out for days. If there were anything down there, we would have found it." I felt my heart sink, the truth settling heavily in my chest. What if 𝐬𝐿 was lost forever? What if I was too late? As I walked back to my car, the weight of defeat descended upon me, but the image of the shadow lingered in my mind. The lake held secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, waiting for the moment I would return. I resolved to find out what lay beneath those dark waters, even if it meant facing my deepest fears. The lake had taken 𝐬𝐿, but it had not taken my resolve. I would return, and this time, I would plunge into the depths to uncover whatever horror it concealed. Story 5, Echoes from the Forgotten Depths. The summer of my 13th year was the last time I ever felt truly safe in my home. Our house, built in the late 1800s, had a charm I had loved as a child, with its creaking floorboards and narrow, twisting stairs. That charm vanished the day I discovered the door to the basement. It had always been there, of course, hidden in the shadow of the old oak cabinet that dominated our living room. My parents had spoken of it in hushed tones, a door they preferred to keep locked and untouched. "Some things are best left alone," my mother would say, glancing nervously at the cabinet as if fearing it might come alive and devour us all. It was enough to stoke my curiosity. Children are relentless in their explorations, and I was no exception. One sultry afternoon, while my parents were away, I decided to find the key. I rummaged through drawers and scoured closets, feeling like a detective on the brink of a great discovery. The thrill of anticipation curled in my stomach as I eventually uncovered a rusted key beneath an old stack of comic books in my father's study. My heart raced. This was the key to the forbidden realm of the basement. With a shudder of excitement, I approached the cabinet. I could feel the air around me shift, thickening with an unspoken tension that made my skin prickle. I pushed aside the cabinet and knelt before the door, my breath shallow. The wood was rough beneath my fingertips, and I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the unknown pressing heavily on my chest. But the desire to uncover what lay beyond the door surged within me, overpowering my fear. Turning the key in the lock sent a chill racing down my spine. The door creaked open, and an inky darkness seeped out, as if the basement had been holding its breath all this time. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. I fumbled for the flashlight I always carried in my pocket, the small beam of light casting eerie shadows on the walls. The basement was dank and musty, smelling of mildew and something else, something that sent a shudder through me. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat reminding me that I was alone in this vast, abandoned space. The concrete walls were rough and cold, and I could see cobwebs hanging like ghostly curtains in the corners. I took a cautious step inside. The floor was littered with old boxes, furniture draped in white sheets that resembled specters in the dim light. My curiosity pulled me deeper. I crept past the piles of forgotten relics, a broken rocking chair, a cracked porcelain doll with one eye missing, its expression frozen in a perpetual stare. Each object felt like a forgotten memory, whispering secrets that I was not meant to hear. I paused by a small window, its glass cloudy with age. From this vantage point, I could see the backyard, eerily quiet, but a shiver ran through me when I turned back to the basement. There, in the far corner, I noticed a shadow moving. My breath caught, and I squinted into the darkness, the beam of my flashlight flickering as I approached. A chill settled in my bones, and I fought the urge to turn back. The darkness seemed to pulse, alive and waiting. I had to know what was there. My flashlight illuminated the corner, and I gasped. A staircase, narrow and steep, led down into deeper darkness. The wood was rotting, splintered in places, yet something compelled me to descend. I hesitated, my mind racing with warnings from my parents, the irrational fears that had been instilled in me. But the promise of discovery, of answers, pulled me forward. As I placed my foot on the first step, the wood groaned beneath my weight. I held my breath, moving slowly, my heart echoing through the silence. Each step felt like an insurmountable journey into an abyss. The air grew colder, carrying a sharp, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The light from my flashlight flickered against the walls, revealing more boxes, but they were different, smaller, more sinister. They seemed to have been shoved aside, as if something had tried to keep them hidden. I knelt down, curiosity battling with dread, and pulled one closer. The box was marked with strange symbols, blackened and faded over the years. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside lay an assortment of items that sent icy fingers of fear running down my spine, old photographs, each depicting a child in various states of distress, their eyes wide and fearful. I felt as if they were staring directly into my soul. My breath quickened, and I slammed the box shut, a gasp escaping my lips. Just then, a noise echoed through the basement, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I froze, my heart racing as the darkness seemed to thicken around me, swirling with an unseen presence. My instinct screamed for me to run, but my body refused to move. I was paralyzed, trapped in a moment that felt suspended in time. Another growl resonated, closer this time, and the air felt charged with something malevolent. It was as if the basement itself had awakened, angry and alive. The shadows shifted and twisted, and I could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on me. I stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from my grip, plunging me into an abyss of darkness. Cold fear gripped my throat as I fumbled for the stairs, desperate to escape the suffocating gloom. But as I turned, I heard a whisper, soft yet haunting, threading through the air like a serpent. "Stay, forever." I didn't stay to listen. I bolted up the staircase, the growl escalating into a roar behind me, echoing in the confined space. My heart thundered in my ears as I reached for the door, yanking it open and slamming it behind me. I sank to the floor, gasping for breath, the weight of the basement still hanging in the air around me. I had ventured into a world that was not mine to explore, and I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever dwelled in that darkness was not finished with me yet. I could feel its presence lingering, a silent promise that I could never shake. The basement was not just a room, it was a doorway, and I had opened it. As I descended the creaking stairs into the basement, the air thickened and grew stale, like a long-forgotten secret waiting to be unearthed. The dim light from the single bulb flickered above me, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. I hesitated at the bottom step, my heart hammering in my chest. The last remnants of daylight filtered through the small, barred window, but I felt as though darkness inhabited every corner of the room. The basement had always unsettled me, but my curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what lay beneath our home, a home I had only recently inherited. My grandmother had lived here alone for decades, and in all that time, she had never spoken of the basement, nor of the odd sounds that occasionally seeped through the floorboards when the night was still. With a deep breath, I stepped fully into the room. Dust motes danced in the air, disturbed by my arrival, and I could see cobwebs draping the corners like ghostly veils. Old furniture loomed in the shadows, an antique trunk, a moth-eaten armchair, and a workbench littered with rusted tools. Their presence felt oppressive, as if they were witnesses to unspeakable events. Each item emanated a history I could almost touch, yet I didn't want to know. I made my way to the far wall, where a faded, peeling painting hung crookedly, depicting a storm-tossed sea. It had always struck me as an odd choice for a basement decoration, but then again, my grandmother's taste had been as eccentric as her demeanor. I reached up to straighten it, my fingers brushing against the cold, damp wall, when a low hum vibrated through the floorboards, rippling through the air like a whisper. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The sound was faint, almost a melody, yet it felt like a warning. I glanced around, but nothing shifted in the shadows, and the silence returned, thick and heavy. I shook my head, convincing myself it was merely the house settling, even as my instinct screamed for me to leave. Turning my attention back to the trunk, I found the latch rusted and stiff. I had to pry it open, my nails scraping against the metal as I exerted more force. With a loud creak, it finally gave way, and the lid swung open with an eerie reluctance. Inside were old clothes, yellowed and moth-eaten, mixed with brittle letters and photographs. Each item seemed to hold its own story, but one photograph drew my immediate attention, a snapshot of a young girl standing in front of the house, her smile wide and innocent, yet her eyes seemed to pierce through time, unsettling in their intensity. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling, and turned it over. On the back, in my grandmother's meticulous handwriting, were the words, "Always watch the darkness." A chill raced down my spine as I dropped the photograph back into the trunk, the thud echoing disproportionately loud in the silence. Suddenly, the humming returned, louder this time, and it felt almost sentient, as if it were calling to me. My breath quickened, and I glanced towards the far corner, where the shadows pooled like spilled ink. The dim light from the bulb above flickered again, and my heart raced as I noticed a narrow door I had never seen before. It was set deep within the wall, partially hidden by a stack of boxes. Compelled by an insatiable curiosity, I approached the door, each step heavy with foreboding. The wood was weathered and dark, its surface smooth but aged, like the skin of something alive. I reached for the knob, my fingers trembling as I twisted it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow tunnel shrouded in darkness. The humming intensified, emanating from within the tunnel, a melodic call that thrummed beneath my skin. I felt drawn to it, yet every instinct warned me to retreat. I hesitated, nerves surging through me, but I couldn't turn back. I had to know what lay within. As I stepped inside, the darkness enveloped me, thick as a fog. I found a flashlight on a shelf nearby and flicked it on, the beam slicing through the gloom. The tunnel stretched ahead, the walls damp and cold, dampness hanging in the air like a shroud. It twisted and turned, each step echoing in my ears, drowning out the humming, which now felt like a heartbeat, a pulse beneath the earth. I pressed forward, the flashlight illuminating fragments of the past, discarded toys, rusted metal, and broken glass strewn across the ground. I stumbled upon a small, open box, its contents spilling out a collection of photographs, all depicting the same girl from the picture in the trunk. The same smile, the same piercing gaze, but with each image, she seemed to age. One photograph showed her beside a man, his face obscured, yet his presence felt overwhelming. The humming rose, swirling in the air around me, drowning my thoughts. In the darkness, I heard a whisper, soft, taunting, as if the shadows were alive. I spun on my heel. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs. I felt something in the darkness, something watching, waiting. With every instinct screaming at me to flee, I turned back towards the tunnel entrance, but the way felt elongated and treacherous. My breath came in shallow gasps as I hurried, the light flickering ominously, shadows reaching for me, grasping at my ankles. I stumbled, the flashlight's beam faltering, and I felt the weight of eyes upon my back. I emerged into the basement, the door slamming shut behind me as if on its own accord. I stood there, gasping for air, my mind racing. The humming had ceased, but its echo lingered in my ears, and I felt a chill sweep across my skin. My heart pounded in my chest, but I knew I wouldn't be able to shake this feeling of dread. Whatever had called to me from that darkness was still there, waiting, its presence lingering just beyond the threshold. And I had awakened it. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, my heart thundering in my chest as I looked down into the darkness. The dim light from the hallway barely penetrated the abyss below, casting long, flickering shadows that danced like specters. I could almost hear the deep, rhythmic pulse of the house, a living thing that thrummed with a life of its own. It was a sound that had been growing louder since I first moved in, an ominous whisper around every corner, a reminder that I was not alone. After the grim discovery of the old photographs in the attic, I felt an overwhelming urge to confront whatever lay in the basement. The pictures had been a mere prelude to the unease settling into my bones. They showed a family that no longer existed, their faces twisted in expressions of joy that felt more like desperation. I had dismissed them at first, but now they haunted my thoughts. What had happened to them? Why did the house feel so heavy with sorrow? Taking a deep breath, I made my way down the creaking steps, the wood protesting beneath my weight. Each step felt like a penance, a betrayal of my instincts that screamed at me to turn back. My fingers brushed against the rough wall as I descended, and I could feel the cold, damp air wrapping around me like a shroud. Once I reached the bottom, I fumbled for the switch. The bare bulb flickered to life, casting an eerie glow over the room. Boxes were strewn about, remnants of a life once lived. A single chair faced a blank wall, its seat dust-covered and untouched. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the children who had once played here, their voices now silenced by time and absence. I took a step further inside, and the smell hit me, a musty blend of decay and something else, something sharper that made my stomach churn. Against my better judgment, I began to sift through the boxes, revealing old toys, yellowed newspapers, and faded clothing. I found a small teddy bear, its fur matted and eyes dull, a relic from a happier time. As I picked it up, a chill swept through the room, causing my breath to hitch. It was then that I noticed the far corner of the basement, an old wooden door, its frame splintered and warped. It had gone unnoticed at first, shrouded in darkness and hidden behind stacks of forgotten memories. My heart raced in a mixture of fear and curiosity. Surely this door led to the source of my unease. I approached it cautiously, every nerve ending alive with anticipation and dread. The door was locked, but I could see the outline of a heavy padlock dangling from a rusted hasp. I felt a strange compulsion to break it open, to unveil whatever lay behind it. But logic held me prisoner. What if it was better left undiscovered? As I debated with myself, I heard a soft rustling sound, barely audible over the thud of my heart. It came from beyond the door. My blood ran cold. I could have sworn I heard a whisper, faint yet distinct, like a child calling for help. I pressed my ear against the weathered wood, straining to catch any further sound. The whisper came again, clearer this time, but unintelligible. Please, it seemed to plead, but the voice was so weak, as if it were fraying at the edges. I stumbled back, a rush of adrenaline propelling me away from the door. This was too much. I had to leave. But the pull of that voice, the desperation embedded in it, anchored me in place. Without thinking, I turned back to the door. Desperation clawed at my throat. I needed to know what was on the other side. I scanned the room for something, anything, that might help me break the lock. My eyes landed on a rusted pipe wrench, still clamped to a nearby workbench. I snatched it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands, and returned to the door. As I swung the wrench at the lock, adrenaline coursed through my veins. With each strike, the sound echoed in the confined space, a deafening clang that resonated deep in my chest. Finally, with a sickening snap, the padlock fell away, clattering to the floor. I hesitated, my breath hitching in my throat. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended further into darkness. The air felt heavier, charged with a malevolent energy that sent a tremor through my limbs. I flicked the light switch beside the door, but the bulb flickered ominously, illuminating only the first few steps. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling as it bounced off the walls. There was no answer, only the oppressive silence that followed. I took a cautious step down, and then another, the wood creaking underfoot. Each step felt like an invitation to something dreadful lurking below. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of desperate voices echoing off the walls. "Help us!" it cried. I shivered as the sound enveloped me, an all-consuming wave of sorrow that wrapped around my heart. I knew I should turn back, that whatever lay at the bottom of the stairs was not meant for me. But something compelled me forward, a strange mix of fear and curiosity urging me to descend further into the unknown. As I reached the bottom, the air grew even colder. The weak light illuminated a dimly lit room, revealing walls lined with old photographs, like the ones I had found in the attic. But these were different, darker, more sinister. The faces in these pictures were twisted in agony, their eyes hollow and pleading. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the truth. I was not the first to step foot in this basement. I was merely the latest in a long line of souls drawn to this place, seeking answers to questions best left unasked. And as I turned to flee, a cold hand grasped my ankle, yanking me backward into the darkness. The storm raged outside, hammering the old house with relentless wind and rain. I had expected the weather to force me into a state of isolation, but it hadn't prepared me for the profound sense of dread that came with the creaking of the ancient floorboards and the unsettling silence that engulfed me when I turned off the television. It was past midnight, or so my phone told me. I couldn't say for sure, having long ago lost track of time. The flickering shadows cast by the dim kitchen light danced across the walls, shifting and rearranging themselves like wraiths in the night. I shivered, wrapped my arms around myself, and thought of the basement. I had been avoiding it since my arrival, but something urged me toward it. Perhaps it was the storm, the way it seemed to amplify each sound, or the way the house itself felt alive, breathing and watching as I moved. My heartbeat pounded in my temples as I stood at the top of the basement stairs. The shadows below seemed to beckon me, a dark invitation impossible to resist. I hesitated, recalling the stories I had heard from the neighbors, whispers of the previous owner, a recluse who vanished without a trace. They said the house had its secrets, that the basement held a darkness that went beyond merely dust and cobwebs. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to know, needed to confront whatever lay beneath the surface. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and took my first step down the stairs. The smell hit me immediately, dampness mingled with something else, something metallic that clawed at the back of my throat. I shuddered but pressed on, each step creaking underfoot, echoing in the stillness. The beam of light revealed a small, cluttered room, boxes piled high along one wall, their contents long forgotten. Old newspapers lay scattered like fallen leaves, the ink curling at the edges. I stepped further in, the light flickering as if it were uncertain of its surroundings. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and I could have sworn I heard something, barely a whisper, echoing through the darkness. I froze, heart racing, straining to listen. "Is anyone down here?" I called out, my voice sounding foreign in the oppressive gloom. Silence met me, heavy and mocking. I turned my attention back to the boxes, curiosity finally overcoming my fear. I pried one open, the lid protesting with a groan. Inside lay a collection of old books, their pages yellowed and brittle. I lifted one and brushed off the dust, the title barely legible, The Forgotten. I flipped through the pages, the words sending a chill down my spine. The text spoke of rituals, of shadows that consumed the unwary. My heart raced as I realized these were not merely stories, they were warnings. I felt the weight of eyes upon me, and I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the dark. But there was nothing, only the relentless sound of the storm raging above. I hurriedly set the book back down and moved to another box, my hands trembling now. This time, I found old photographs, their edges curling with age. I recognized the house in some of them, but the people were strangers, their faces obscured by time. I picked one up, a family portrait. They looked happy, but the longer I stared at it, the more unsettling it became. Their smiles seemed forced, their eyes hollow, as if they knew a truth that eluded me. As I examined the photograph, a noise broke through, soft, almost like a whisper but layered beneath the sound of the storm. I held my breath, straining to discern the words. "Help." A shiver coursed through me, and I dropped the photo, stumbling back against the wall. What was happening? My phone's flashlight flickered again, a warning perhaps. The whispers grew louder, echoing in the confined space, a chorus of pleas and fears, a cacophony that melded with the howling wind outside. I felt trapped, the walls closing in around me. I turned to flee, but before I could take a single step, a figure emerged from the shadows. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as my heart pounded in my chest, the outline sharpened. A woman, her face pale and sunken, her hair a tangled mess, stood there, a specter of despair. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her eyes bore into mine, and I saw a lifetime of agony reflected there. "Leave," she rasped, her voice scraping against my very soul. You must leave before it's too late." Before I could process her words, she dissolved into the darkness, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the boxes. Panic surged within me. I raced up the stairs, my breath quickening as I could almost feel the shadows reaching for me. The whispers turned to screams, echoing in my mind as I burst into the hallway, slamming the basement door behind me. I leaned against it, my heart pounding, the remnants of fear flooding me. The storm continued its assault on the house as I sank to the floor, gasping for breath. This house, with its secrets and its shadows, was alive. I realized that I couldn't ignore the past any longer. The basement had shown me a glimpse of the darkness dwelling within, and I couldn't run from it. I had to face whatever horrors lay waiting for me. Tomorrow I would seek out the truth, even if it meant venturing down into the basement again. I felt the storm raging outside, but now it seemed a distant echo compared to the storm brewing inside me. I was done with avoidance. I would uncover the secrets of this house, no matter the cost. It was the sound that woke me. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed through the house, pulling me from the grip of a fitful sleep. I blinked into the darkness, trying to make sense of the familiar shadows that surrounded me. My heart raced as I listened, the tapping morphing into a steady thrum that seemed to pulse through the floor beneath me. The basement. I knew the sound was coming from down there. I sat up, the sheets tangling around my legs. Memories of the night I first ventured down into the dark cavern flooded my mind. The musty air, the flickering light, the sense of being watched, each detail formed a vivid picture I couldn't shake. A chill skated down my spine. It had been weeks since I had dared to venture into that basement, but now the sound pulled at me like a string, taut and beckoning. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet landing on the cool wooden floor. The house was quiet, too quiet. I strained to listen, focusing on the rhythmic tapping. It could have been a piece of furniture shifting, the house settling. But deep down, I felt an unsettling certainty that something else was down there. Something waiting. With a deep breath, I stood and shuffled toward the door. Each creak of the floorboards sent shivers dancing up my legs. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated, and then opened it slowly, the hinges protesting softly. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the faint glow of the moon filtering through a window at the far end. I felt exposed, a moth drawn to a flame. The tapping continued, a maddening cadence that urged me forward. I crept down the hall, breath held tight in my chest. As I approached the basement door, I noticed a crack beneath it, where darkness seeped through like a living thing. My heart drummed louder, fear clashing with a morbid curiosity. I gripped the doorknob, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. The door creaked open, and the air that rushed past me was musty and damp, laced with something sour. My pulse quickened as I descended the stairs. Each step felt like a challenge against gravity itself, as if the basement sought to pull me deeper into its embrace. The light flickered overhead, casting warped shadows that danced along the walls. The tapping was clearer now, more urgent, echoing off the concrete and metal shelving. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the source, but all I saw was the clutter of old boxes and forgotten furniture. What had once felt like a refuge now transformed into an oppressive cell. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The tapping ceased, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I took another step down, and then another, until I reached the bottom, where the light betrayed me with its flickering. There, in the far corner, amidst the shadows, I spotted something small and dark. My breath hitched as I approached, the hairs on my neck prickling. It was a hammer, lying abandoned on the floor, rusted and stained. It seemed an innocent enough object, but the way it was positioned, just barely out of view, sent a shiver of dread coursing through me. Suddenly, a crash erupted behind me, a heavy thud that reverberated through the basement. I spun around, heart pounding, and saw the door swinging shut, slamming against the frame with a finality that sent a shock of panic through me. I rushed toward it, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out!" I shouted, banging on the door, but the wood only absorbed my desperate pleas. The light flickered again, plunging me into darkness for an instant, and when it returned, there was something different in the air. A presence, thick and suffocating, wrapped itself around me. I felt it before I saw it, a shift in the shadows, a movement just beyond the edge of light. My heart raced, pounding a frantic rhythm in my chest. In that fleeting moment, a figure emerged, just a glimpse, but enough to steal my breath. A gaunt silhouette, indistinct yet menacing, loomed just out of reach. I backed away, my feet stumbling over the clutter, and my hands frantically searched for anything to defend myself. The tapping returned, louder now, a frantic drumming as if 1,000 hands were striking against the walls. Panic clawed at my throat. I had to get out. I turned back to the door, my palms pressing against the wood. "Please, let me out," I cried, desperation pouring from my voice. The air around me thickened, wrapping like chains. The tapping morphed into a cacophony of whispers, muffled voices weaving through the silence, taunting me. In a final burst of adrenaline, I threw myself against the door, and it gave way just enough for me to squeeze through. I stumbled into the hallway, heart racing. The basement lay behind me, a gaping maw full of shadows and secrets, and I fled, desperate to escape the darkness that had gripped me so tightly. As I slammed the door shut, I pressed my back against it, breathing heavily, trying to process the horror that lingered in the air. But even as I stood there, shaking, I could hear it, the faint tapping, now muffled but insistent, echoing from the other side. The basement wasn't finished with me yet. Story 6, Detour to the Forgotten Abyss. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the winding road that snaked through the dense woods. I could feel the anticipation bubbling in my chest, a mix of excitement and dread. It was our first real road trip since college, a last-minute decision made over pizza and beer the weekend prior. The four of us, my friends Jake, Lisa, and Mark, planned to hit the coast and camp under the stars. It was supposed to be a break from our mundane lives, a chance to unwind and reconnect. The car's engine hummed steadily, the rhythmic sound blending with the music streaming from the Bluetooth speakers. I took a moment to appreciate the fleeting freedom of the moment, laughter swirling around us as Mark sang off-key, prompting Lisa to throw a half-eaten bag of chips at him. It was a snapshot of joy, one I wish could last forever. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, that joy began to feel more and more like a thin veil over the encroaching darkness. The trees lining the road stood tall and imposing, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. I shivered involuntarily, dismissing it as the chill of the evening air, but a voice at the back of my mind whispered something different. "Are we lost?" Lisa asked, her voice breaking through my reverie. She leaned forward in her seat, peering at the GPS as if it were a crystal ball holding all the answers. "No, we're fine," Jake assured her, though his voice held a hint of uncertainty. "Just a little detour, that's all." Detour. I didn't like the sound of that. At first, it had seemed like an adventure, taking a back road to avoid the traffic that clung to the main highway like an unwelcome guest. But the deeper we wound into the woods, the more I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. The trees loomed closer, their shadows throwing eerie shapes across the road. Mark pulled out his phone to check the signal, but his expression shifted from casual to concerned. "No bars," he muttered, his brow furrowing. "Not even a single one." My stomach nodded. "How far until we reach the campsite?" I asked, hoping someone had been keeping track of time. Jake shrugged, glancing back at me. "A couple of hours, maybe? It shouldn't be long if we stay on track." But as we drove deeper into the forest, the darkness thickened around us. The trees pressed in, forming a tunnel of shadows, and I could hardly see the sky anymore. A sense of claustrophobia settled over me. It felt unnatural, wrong, and I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "I don't like this road," I admitted, breaking the tension. "Can't we turn back?" "Don't be such a baby," Mark shot back, though I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. "It's just woods." But it was more than just woods. Something about the silence unsettled me. There were no crickets chirping, no rustle of leaves in the wind, just a heavy stillness that felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. "Look," Lisa said suddenly, her voice sharp. "There's something up ahead." I squinted through the windshield, my heart racing as I caught sight of a dilapidated building rising against the backdrop of the darkening sky. It looked as if it had been abandoned for years, its wooden planks peeling and warped, a ghost of a structure swallowed by nature. A chill raced down my spine. "Let's check it out," Jake suggested, the thrill of discovery igniting his bravado. "Are you serious?" I glared at him, but the glimmer in his eyes showed that he was already set on the idea. "Come on, it could be fun." Mark chimed in, the adventurous spirit of youth bubbling to the surface. Before I could protest, Jake turned the wheel, guiding the car off the road and onto a rutted path that led towards the building. As we climbed out, the air felt heavy around us, thickening with the scent of damp earth and decay. The building loomed larger as we approached, its broken windows staring at us like hollow eyes filled with secrets. I hesitated at the threshold, my instinct screaming to turn back, but the others moved ahead, curiosity drawing them into the darkness. Inside, the air was stale, suffocating in its silence. Shadows clung to the corners, shapes shifting as if alive. I felt the walls closing in on me, and a primal urge surged to flee. But I forced myself to stay, to hold on to the thread of camaraderie that tied us together. "Guys, maybe we should," I started, but the words died in my throat when I saw Lisa freeze, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice a mere breath. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was the low creaking of the building settling, or perhaps something more unsettling. My heart thundered in my chest, and in that moment, I was painfully aware of how alone we truly were, surrounded by the darkened woods that felt somehow alive. Jake laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but it sounded hollow, echoing off the peeling walls. "It's just an old building. There's nothing to be afraid of." But fear had wrapped its cold fingers around me, and as I glanced at the others, I realized I was no longer alone in my dread. They were all on edge, eyes darting, breaths shallow. Something about this place felt wrong, as if the very air was tainted with whispers of past horrors. And then I heard it too, a sound filtering through the air, a low, shuffling noise that sent a jolt of panic through me. It was coming from the darkness beyond the threshold, where shadows danced and where we had just come from. Something was out there. We stood frozen, the thrill of adventure evaporating into a suffocating dread as the reality of our situation set in. We were miles away from civilization, trapped in a dying building surrounded by an endless, oppressive forest. I knew then that this road trip would not end in laughter and memories. It had morphed into something far more sinister, and I could only hope we wouldn't pay the price for our recklessness. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked asphalt of Route 66. I could feel the chill creeping in, seeping through the open window as I drove. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, just a few days to escape the humdrum of my life, but I already felt the weight of something unfurling in the pit of my stomach. I glanced at Laura, who was fiddling with the radio. Her face was illuminated by the flickering light of the dashboard. A hint of concern shadowed her features. "You sure we're going the right way? This doesn't look like any map I've seen." "Yeah, I mean, the GPS says we're right on track," I replied, though I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. I hadn't thought much about the winding back roads we'd taken after leaving the main highway. It had felt adventurous at the time, a chance to explore the forgotten parts of America, but now the surroundings felt oppressive. The trees lining the road grew thicker, their gnarled branches reaching for the van like skeletal fingers. I pulled over to check the map again, squinting at the paper while Laura raised an eyebrow. "You'll get us lost," she said half-jokingly, but the unease in her tone was palpable. "Just a quick look," I muttered, trying to shake off my own anxiety. The map was confusing, full of squiggly lines and faded ink. I traced the route with my finger, but none of the landmarks were familiar. The phone signal had dropped, leaving us without any digital navigation. I felt a surge of frustration, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of impending doom. As I stuffed the map back into the glove compartment, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. A faint sound echoed from the direction of the woods, an unsettling rustle, too rhythmic to be just the wind. I dismissed it as my imagination, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Let's keep moving," Laura said, casting a nervous glance toward the trees. "It feels weird out here." I nodded, starting the engine and easing back onto the road. The monotonous rumble of the tires against the pavement became a sort of mantra, and I focused on it to drown out the whispers of anxiety. We drove in silence, Laura occasionally casting glances at the rearview mirror. Whatever she thought she saw made her fidget, and I felt my own nerves tighten. "Let's stop for gas soon," she said, breaking the silence like a glass shattering. "I don't want to end up stranded out here." A few miles later, we found a dilapidated gas station, its neon sign barely flickering against the darkening sky. It looked like it hadn't been in use for years. The windows were dusty, obscured by grime, and the pump was rusted over. "Doesn't look promising," I muttered, but the empty road behind us made me uneasy. "I'll go check," Laura said, reaching for the door handle before I could protest. She stepped out, the warm breeze rustling her hair. I watched as she approached the pump, her unease palpable. I rolled my window down slightly, trying to catch snippets of sound. The only thing I heard was the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle from the woods. I waited, glancing at the old building. Its peeling paint and broken glass gave off an eerie vibe. My heart raced as I thought about how isolated we were. "Ah, there's nobody here," Laura called back after a few moments. "I'm not sure if we should stick around." "Let's just fill up and get out of here," I replied, shifting uncomfortably in my seat. I wasn't keen on the idea of leaving without gas, but I trusted her instincts. We had a long drive ahead, and it felt like the shadows were creeping closer, pressing in on us. As I prepared to leave, the sudden sound of a slamming door made me jump. My pulse quickened when I turned to see a figure emerging from the woods, an older man, grizzled and disheveled, with an unsettling smile stretching across his weathered face. He wore a faded flannel shirt, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Y'all lost?" he asked, his voice gravelly and deep. I felt the hair on my arms stand up as he approached our car. "No, just stopping for gas," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. His presence felt wrong. Something about him made me want to lock the doors and drive away. "Not much gas around here, I'll tell you that," he said, chuckling to himself. "Best to fill up quick before you end up like the others." "Others?" Laura echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "Yup. Strange things happen out here, you know. Folks come and go, but they don't always leave the way they came." His smile widened, revealing teeth that looked as if they hadn't seen a toothbrush in years. "Thanks, but we'll be on our way," I said sharply, shifting the gear into drive. I wanted to speed away, but curiosity kept me rooted. "Suit yourselves. Just remember, roads aren't always what they seem." He waved as we pulled away, his laughter echoing in the stillness. As the station faded from view, an uncomfortable silence enveloped us. I dared to glance at Laura, who looked as unsettled as I felt. "What was that about?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to shake off the weird vibe. "Let's just keep going." But deep down, I knew we had crossed a line. The road ahead felt more treacherous than ever, and the shadows loomed larger. Something sinister lurked just beyond the trees, and I feared that our little adventure had only just begun. The sky was bruised with the weight of an impending storm as we drove deeper into the woods, the winding road shrinking around us like a serpent coiling tighter. The trees closed in on either side, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to pull us into their dark embrace. I could feel the tension thickening in the air, electric and oppressive, and I cast sidelong glances at Mark, my boyfriend, as he gripped the steering wheel. He seemed oblivious to the atmosphere, absorbed in the music blaring from the speakers, an upbeat tune that felt jarring against the backdrop of our surroundings. "Hey, do you think we should stop somewhere?" I ventured, my voice barely rising above the chorus. We hadn't seen a gas station or a sign of civilization for miles, just the unrelenting expanse of trees and the occasional glimpse of a shadow flitting between them. Mark chuckled, eyes still fixed ahead. "What, you scared?" "It's just a road trip. We're fine. Just checking." I forced a smile, though unease coiled in my stomach. The further we traveled, the more I felt like we were plunging into an abyss, the world we left behind fading away with each turn of the wheels. As dusk settled like a heavy curtain, the shadows deepened, and the music began to lose its charm. I stared out at the narrowing road, the headlights cutting through the darkness in thin beams. Suddenly, the car sputtered and then stuttered, a sickly sound that made my heart leap. Mark frowned, tapping the dashboard. "What the hell?" "No way. Not now." He pulled over to the side, and the engine gave a final cough before falling silent. "Great," I muttered, feeling the weight of impending dread settle over us. "What now?" Mark leaned back in his seat, irritation flaring in his eyes. "Let me check the engine. It's probably nothing." As he stepped out, the cold night air rushed in, carrying with it a damp chill that pricked at my skin. I watched him open the hood, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the dashboard lights. The forest loomed silently around us, an audience to our growing isolation. I wanted to roll down the window and ask if he needed help, but the whispered warnings in my mind made me hesitate. The minutes dragged on, the stillness of the night thickening with each passing second. I finally unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out, instinctively clenching my jacket around me. "Mark, you okay?" He was on his knees, peering into the engine compartment, muttering to himself. "Just a little bit of trouble," he called back, his voice strained. I shifted nervously from foot to foot, glancing around the darkened woods. Shadows slipped between the trees, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon us. The tension in my gut tightened like a vice. "Come on, hurry up," I urged, trying to keep the quiver out of my voice. "Just a minute," he snapped, and I flinched. I had never heard the tone directed at me before, and it stung. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves like hushed whispers, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stepped closer to the car, my gaze darting to the tree line. It was too quiet, too still. An instinct kicked in. I felt as if I was in a trap, and though I resisted the urge to bolt, every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. Just as I was about to call out again, I heard an echoing rustle from deeper in the trees, low and deliberate. My heart raced as I turned, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. There was nothing but the shifting shadows, mocking me. "Mark!" I shouted, the fear bubbling over. "Can you hurry?" He stood abruptly, slamming the hood shut with a thud that reverberated through the night. "I can't find the problem. The car's just dead." "What do you mean dead?" I could hear the panic in my voice now. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etching lines on his forehead. We can't just stay here. I'll try to start it again. Another rustle, closer this time. My breath quickened, and I stepped back, suddenly aware of how exposed we were. Mark, something's out there. We should go. Go where? There's nothing but trees. Before I could respond, I heard it again, a low, guttural sound that sent chills spiraling down my spine. It was nothing human. My instincts flared, and I grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward the driver's side. Get in the car. Now. Nina, you're being ridiculous. Get in. I interrupted, urgency spilling into my words. He hesitated for a moment, his expression shifting as he caught the growing fear in my eyes. Reluctantly, he climbed back into the driver's seat, but I remained standing, my eyes fixed on the darkness. I could feel the air thickening, something ancient and primal lurking just out of sight. Mark fumbled with the key, trying again and again to coax life into the engine. But it was no use. The car remained silent, a coffin of metal in the encroaching night. We need to, I began, but my voice faltered as a soft thud echoed from the forest, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the ground itself. I looked at Mark, his face pale under the dashboard lights, and my heart sank. We're not alone. He froze, realization washing over him. In that moment, as the darkness pressed in closer, I knew that whatever was out there was no mere creature of the night. It was something far more sinister, something that fed on fear. Lock the doors, I whispered, my throat dry. The sound came again, closer still, and I felt a primal urge to run. But where could we go? The road was empty, and the trees surrounded us like a wall, suffocating and unyielding. Mark hit the locks, the sound echoing in the stillness. The headlights cast a feeble glow into the night, but it was barely enough to pierce the encroaching darkness. A low growl rose from the trees, sending a shiver through me, and I pressed back against the seat, feeling the tremor in my hands. Please, I whispered, start the car. But as we sat there, the engine dead and the forest closing in, I understood that this was just the beginning. The sun dipped below the horizon, transforming the sky into a bruised palette of purples and blues. I squinted against the fading light, the road ahead sneaking into shadows. Hank, my traveling companion, sat silently beside me, lost in thought. We had been on the road for days, the tires humming a steady rhythm against the asphalt, but something in the air felt different tonight. It was heavier, charged with a tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Do you think we should stop soon? I asked, my voice breaking the uneasy silence. I had been clutching the steering wheel tighter than usual, anxious to get to our destination, but increasingly aware that pressing on might not be the best option. My instinct was screaming at me to pull over, to rest, but I couldn't explain why. Just a few more miles, Hank replied, his gaze fixed ahead. He seemed distant, almost oblivious to the thickening atmosphere around us. I turned my eyes back to the road, where a faint flicker of light caught my attention in the rearview mirror. A car had just emerged from behind the trees lining the road, its headlights illuminating the gathering darkness. That car's been following us for a while, I said, my heart quickening. I felt a chill spread through me, igniting the fear that had begun to gnaw on my insides since we started this trip. It wasn't that it was unusual for cars to be on the road, especially at this hour, but there was something unsettling about the way it stuck close behind us, always maintaining a constant distance. Hank turned to look, his brow furrowed. Just some late-night driver, he reassured me, but the uncertainty in his voice belied his words. The car was an unremarkable sedan, its shadows blurring against the trees, but the way it seemed to match our speed made my skin crawl. I pressed the gas pedal a little harder, the engine responding with a growl. The road curved sharply, and I leaned into the bend, the world outside a blur of darkness and indistinct shapes. The headlights behind us flickered, and for a heartbeat, they seemed to dim, as though the driver had turned them off completely. An icy knot tightened in my stomach. "Maybe we should pull over," I said again, my voice now a threat of urgency. "Just for a second, let's see what they do." "Are you serious?" Hank shot back, his tone harsh. "We're almost there. We can't just stop in the middle of nowhere. It's not safe." His words hung heavy in the air, and I felt the adrenaline of panic coursing through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just coincidence. The inexplicable dread weighted my chest, and I could feel the presence of the pursuing vehicle like a dark cloud pressing down. A rustle outside the window drew my attention, and I glimpsed movement in the trees beyond the road. My heart raced, the rhythm pounding in my ears as I tried to focus. Branches swayed, casting surreal shadows in the dim light, but all I could think of was the car behind us, its headlights glowing like a predator's eyes in the night. The road dipped, revealing a crooked sign, a weathered marker for a nearby town named Black Hollow. I had never heard of it, and the name sent a shiver down my spine. "There's a town just ahead. Maybe we should go in." "Get some gas or something," I suggested, my voice tinged with desperation. Hank sighed, and I could tell he was wavering. "Fine. But only if it's just a quick stop." I took the next turn, the tires crunching over gravel as we drove into the town's entrance. The place seemed forgotten, each house and storefront coated in a layer of dust and cobwebs. The street lamps flickered weakly, casting ghostly pools of light onto the cracked pavement. As I rolled to a stop at the only gas station in sight, I glanced back at the road behind us. The car had followed us, pulling into the opposite side of the station, its headlights now off. I could barely make out the figure inside, but they remained still, hidden in shadow. A visceral dread gripped me. "Let's just go inside," I urged, my heart pounding like a war drum. "We'll be safe in there." Hank nodded reluctantly, and we climbed out of the car, the night air chilling against my skin. A bell jingled as we pushed through the glass door of the station, and the scent of stale coffee and old asphalt filled my nostrils. The cashier, an elderly man with weary eyes, looked up from behind the counter, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "We just need some gas," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "And maybe a snack." "Pumps outside. The snacks are in the back." He gestured toward a dimly lit aisle. I moved toward the snacks while Hank checked out the pumps, but my eyes kept drifting back to the window. The sedan still sat there, its engine silent, as if waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was inside was watching. I picked up a couple of candy bars and a bottle of water, my hands trembling. I returned to the front, but Hank was nowhere in sight. I glanced out the window again, and my heart dropped. The sedan's door stood ajar, but Hank was still at the pump, oblivious. "Hey, Hank," I called out, feeling a panic rise in my throat. He turned, and in that moment, I saw the silhouette of a figure emerge from the shadows of the car. My heart raced, and I rushed toward the door, my instinct screaming, "Hank, get back in the car." He looked confused, but he didn't argue. He started to walk back toward me, but the figure moved, gliding between the gaps of the gas pumps, a dark shape that sent a jolt of terror through me. "Hank!" I shouted again, my voice rising as I rushed out. The figure paused, and for the briefest moment, I saw its face, a twisted expression of malice that made bile rise in my throat. "Get in!" I yelled, my voice cracking, but the figure stepped closer, blocking Hank's path. The world around me blurred as adrenaline coursed through my veins. I sprinted toward them, the echo of my footsteps piercing the stillness. Before I could reach Hank, the figure lunged forward, and I screamed. The night erupted in chaos, a palpable sense of dread wrapping around us like a noose. The darkness felt alive, and as fear consumed me, I realized we had stumbled into something far worse than we could have ever imagined. After the incident at the diner, the mood in the car shifted, thickening with an unspoken tension. The laughter and music that had filled the space just hours earlier were replaced by silence, punctuated only by the relentless hum of the tires against the asphalt. I stole glances at my friend Jamie, slouched with her arms crossed, staring out the window, and Mark, who gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally along the road. "We should stop for the night," I finally suggested, breaking the silence that had settled like a fog. My voice sounded distant, even to me. Mark's eyes flicked toward me, the headlights illuminating the sweat glistening on his brow. "There's nothing for miles, Claire. We can't stop now." His tone was harsher than I anticipated, but it made sense. We were in the middle of nowhere, and the memory of the diner still clung to us like a bad smell. As the landscape blurred past, my mind replayed the scene in the diner over and over, the waitress's sunken eyes, the way she had stared at Jamie and me as if we were ghosts. "Do you think they'll come for you?" The words echoed in my head, a haunting melody that twisted in my gut. I wanted to shake the feeling off, but it clung to me like the chill of the evening air. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, the kind of road that made you wonder if you'd driven into some desolate world. An unsettling sensation crept over me, the kind you feel when someone walks over your grave. I shivered despite the heat from the car's vents. "Let's just find a place," I urged again, more insistently this time. "We can't drive all night." Mark's jaw clenched, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. Finally, he sighed. "All right, fine. But just for a couple of hours. We'll find a motel or something." Relief washed over me momentarily, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. With every mile that passed, the weight of dread grew heavier in the air, filling the car with an oppressive silence. I couldn't help but glance back at the fading glow of the diner's neon sign, feeling a strange tug at my heart. It would be easy to dismiss it as just a roadside stop, but something about that place gnawed at the corners of my mind. As we continued, the headlights caught something in the road ahead, a dark shape sprawled across the asphalt. Mark slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing in protest. "What the hell is that?" Jamie exclaimed, her voice tight with anxiety. A figure lay motionless in the middle of our lane, obscured by the darkness. My heart raced as we stepped out of the car, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I felt the dread creeping back in, wrapping itself around my spine. "Hello?" Mark called, hesitantly approaching the figure. I wanted to scream at him to come back, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. As we drew closer, the details began to emerge: a man, dirty and disheveled, his clothes torn and stained. His face was obscured by dirt and hair, and a silence hung in the air that felt almost sacred, like the moment before a storm. "Is he alive?" Jamie whispered, her voice wavering. Mark knelt beside him, and I stood a few paces away, heart hammering in my chest. The man's eyes flickered open, revealing a wild gaze that sent a chill down my spine. "Help," he croaked, the word barely a whisper. Before I knew it, Mark was reaching for the man, but I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Wait," I said, urgency flooding my voice. "We don't know what's wrong with him." The man's gnarled fingers clawed at the air, and panic shot through me as I imagined the worst. "You're not safe," he rasped. "They're coming." "Who's coming?" Jamie asked, her voice trembling. "They're always watching," he gasped, his words slurring together in a frenzy. "You must leave this road. Turn back before it's too late." I felt a rush of nausea at his words, the way they echoed the unease that had settled in my gut since we left the diner. I glanced at Mark, whose face had gone pale. "We need to call for help," he said, looking up at me. "We can't just leave him here." "Mark, we can't stay," I insisted, my voice rising. "We need to go. Now." The man drew in a ragged breath, his chest heaving. "You don't understand," he said, his voice growing frantic. "They'll find you. They always do." The shadows grew longer, darkening the edges of the road, and the wind howled as if in response. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on me, a suffocating cocoon of dread. I could hear the faint sound of laughter echoing in my mind, the memory of that diner playing back like a reel of film. "Claire, we can't leave him," Mark insisted, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The man was no longer coherent, thrashing against the ground as if trying to escape an invisible force. "Mark," I said urgently, glancing over my shoulder toward the dark stretch of road behind us. "Please." In that moment, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a sudden chill that sent goosebumps racing across my skin. The man's eyes widened in fear, and he shook his head violently. "Run," he screamed, his voice raw with panic. "Run." Without thinking, I grabbed 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐿's arm and turned on my heel, sprinting back towards the car. Mark hesitated for a heartbeat longer, but I could see the resolve crumbling as the realization sank in. He followed us, stumbling in his haste, and I climbed into the back seat while 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫 rushed into the front. "Go! Go!" I shouted, the panic spilling over, the urgency pushing us into action. With a roar of the engine, Mark slammed the car into gear, and we sped away from that dark figure, the sound of his screams fading into the distance. But even as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had lurked in the shadows was still tracking us. The open road stretched ahead, but the night felt heavy with promises of terror that would not easily fade.